Well, good morning, everyone. We are back at our Advisory Commission meeting for Special Education for February. And I'm very pleased to say we have some new faces we're going to introduce you to. So we have to get started right away. First, we'll do the call to order. And we have Erin that's helping us now. Welcome to Erin, too.
Hi, Erin.
Hi, Erin. Here. Here. Here.
Present. Here. Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Here.
Okay, it sounds like you have a quorum. I just want to make a quick announcement about Erin. You've just met Erin. Erin is on my staff in the director's office in the special education division. Behind him is Stacy Wadeen, who is also on my director's office staff. And Erin has just joined the director's office recently. I'll let him just give the 30-second, who is he and what is he doing here? But Erin has been working as the liaison in our division to the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and he has worked in one of our focus monitoring units, working directly with districts for a number of years, and has a pretty extensive background in special education. I think you'll find him very helpful and competent, and he will be your conduit to the division. And so he and Stacy are always available to you, as well as I am, Erin.
Test. Just a quick little bit on my background. I do have a master's in education with concentration in special education. I also hold a mild to moderate ed specialist credential, as well as a multiple subject credential and a preliminary admin credential. I started my career in special education as an RSP teacher for an elementary school. Went to a middle school as an RSP teacher, co-teaching, and a department chair. Moved to inclusive education and worked in inclusive education for a long time, supporting students with moderate severe disabilities to be in the classroom for the entirety of their day. And that was K through 12. After doing that for a while, I moved to an administrator position and ran programs and assisted programs pre-K to adult transition for a region in a large school district, which consisted of a high school, middle school, and 5 elementaries, as well as ran the home hospital program. Sat across in my district for a review from CDE. I thought that was an interesting process, so they convinced me to join their team and worked with focus monitoring for a while. And then most recently over to the director's office. So I'm excited to be here, and yes, please contact me for anything. I'd be happy to help however I can.
Thank you, Erin. Let's get things started. If Steve, would you like to do the flag salute with us? So we have a really great couple days of work ahead of us, but I want to take a moment to welcome 2 new commissioners that are joining us, and also be able to give them some information about who all of us are so that they can feel part of the group right away. It's been my real privilege and honor to serve on this commission for a number of years now. And I can tell you that in my career in education, without a doubt, some of the finest human beings I've ever met have worked in this field of working with students with disabilities. So it's just a joy to meet the people that I meet here in Sacramento and meet in my own district in the work that I do. I can remember vividly my first commission meeting. And I did feel a little in a fog for a while until I understood what was happening. So don't feel like that would be an unusual thing for you to be feeling these next 2 days. But any one of us here remembers how we felt when we were new, and we would be more than happy to answer any questions you have or help you get acclimated, because we are very confident that you have a lot to offer our discussions, and your experience will be really invaluable to the conversations that we have. So we want to hear a little bit about you, and we will also share about us so you get to know who we are, and that's helpful. And maybe the best way, so you're not on the spot right off the bat, is we will just go around in a half circle and go one by one about who we are. Maybe just say what you do for your work or your life, and so we get a sense of that, and your appointing body, just a couple sentences on who you are, and get us started. So why don't we start with Christine, and then we'll work our way and get around to Dawn. Do you want us to go first? What would you feel more comfortable with? Okay, you go ahead and start.
No, I'm not confident, but I'm Christine Oyakawa. I was just appointed in end of last year by the state board. I'm a mom of two. My younger one has 22q deletion syndrome, and she's also hard of hearing, so we're pretty active in the DHH community in the area. Live in Davis, so it's a pretty good commute here. I currently help run a nonprofit that offers second language classes to to elementary school kids. So I work with a lot of teachers and want to be teachers or hope to be teachers. And in a prior life, I worked as an attorney. I practiced in New York. I'm licensed in California, but I haven't practiced in the state. Do a lot of kind of volunteer advocacy for friends and myself and my daughter. So that's me. Thank you.
Welcome. My name is Janine Topalian. I'm in my regular day. I work for a Los Angeles Unified School District as an administrator in psychological services. And I'm also the president-elect, soon to be president for the California Association of School Psychologists, which we had the pleasure of having Kristen and her team come to our meeting last time. And I have two children too who are pretty active.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sarah Jocham, and my day job is an assistant superintendent of student support services in Newport Mesa Unified School District, which is in Orange County. And I have been a career special educator. My background is as a speech pathologist, and then I've kind of gone the administrative route for the past several years. I have two children. I have a typical son, 19, in college, pray for me. And then I have my daughter who is 17 and a half. And so we are going through the challenges and angst of figuring out what her transition plan will be when she turns 18 in adult transition program. So welcome to the new people.
Involved in education for over, getting 42 years.
Wow.
Yes. Oh, goodness. I keep waking up and going, how did that happen? Anyway, as a school principal and teacher of students with disabilities, and also assistant superintendent of a school district for 20 years. Boss of the little people. That was my word. So love being here, love what we're doing in the sense about guiding students with disabilities and their education, and I've been on the commission for, it's actually 6 years. So, thank you.
Good morning, all. My name is David Toston, and I'm the Associate Superintendent of SELPA Programs for the El Dorado County Office of Education. We provide support through our SELPAs for LEAs within our county and a number of LEAs throughout the state. I have been a member of the commission. I believe this is my third year, and I want to welcome you. It's a great group to be a part of, to watch the conversations develop and be an active participant in shaping the policy of California as it relates to special ed. I have two children, 21 and 19, and one's a college senior, and the other one is a college sophomore. And so for those of you who have younger children, take pictures when they're around 19 and 21. They're super cute at this age. It just, time flies so quickly. Just wanted to welcome both of you to the commission and look forward to getting to know you a little bit better. Thank you.
I'm Summer Harding. I am an elementary school principal, and I've been on the commission a number of years now. I'm pleased to say that my children have graduated from college. It's hard to imagine. I have one in law school, and she seems to be leaning towards working with, she's been working with children's advocacy groups and things and some internship programs. So that's very exciting, and I'm very proud of her for that. And my eldest daughter who did have struggles in school, and I worked through all those issues as a parent. She's now probably got the best job of anybody that is 26 years old. She's an associate sales rep for Stryker Medical and traveling all around the country. She's just coming back from a business trip in Hawaii, poor thing. So all of those years of working through challenges and learning, I feel very grateful to have had the support of people that I know in this field that helped me understand how to support her and being all that she could be. So it's very exciting, and I'm currently serving as chair with David beside me, and very grateful for his assistance, and welcome both of you to the commission.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Wright. My day job is as State Director of Special Education. My bigger full-time job is mom to Shelby, Violet, and Ace, who are all adults, which is hard to believe. And I'm in my year with my middle daughter, Shelby, who has disabilities, where she is turning 22 this year. And so it's a huge year of transition and thinking about what's next there. And I got my start in this work sitting on this advisory commission and being appointed by the Senate about a decade ago. And so I'm living proof that anything is possible. And so welcome you here, and really looking forward to your contributions, parents.
Good morning. My name's Gina Plate, and let's see, my day job is I oversee special education at the California Charter Schools Association. This is my last commission meeting, and I have to say that it's hard to sit up here without Barbara because we've had, I definitely feel like I've had the privilege of working with Barbara leading this commission for 2 terms, and so we'll get the opportunity to honor her later today. But, I will say that for the new folks, it is such an incredible honor to be a part of this commission, because not only do you get to hear from all of the folks that are either policymakers or stakeholders that come to you and ask your input because of your expertise in the work, you get to take your hat off. And when you come through that door, and you get to just focus on what's in the best interest of kids. And sometimes our day jobs put us in positions of, yes, putting kids first, but also thinking about membership. And, we have to wear lots of different hats. But in this room, we have the privilege of saying we're putting kids first and pulling together a really diverse group of folks to weigh in on really important issues that affect all kids in our state. So just want to make that plug for the commission, and thank you for it. It's a big time commitment, so thank you for your service.
Hi, I'm Michelle Anders. We had a chance to meet earlier. I'm the special education coordinator at Granada Hills Charter High School. So it's a very large high school. So we have about 450 kids with IEPs and another 150 with 504s. So it's a big job, but I love it. And I love the diversity and the opportunity to make something really unique there. And I think it kind of extends into this commission, because I bring back a lot of interesting ideas and perspectives. and I'm allowed to let that influence our practices, which I hopefully you guys will have the same experience. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Havanya Hayes White. This is my 21st year in education. I started out as a classroom teacher, teaching students with moderate to severe disabilities in LAUSD. Taught in the classroom for 15 years. Now I am a professor. I prepare teachers who are pursuing their education specialist credentials. So either they're earning their mild, moderate, or mild, severe, or extensive support needs. And what's the other one? Yeah. I love preparing teachers, mentoring teachers, supporting them in the classroom. And yes, so thank you.
So good. I had a throat lozenge in my mouth at first, so I'm much better today than I was yesterday. So, anyways, welcome. I still feel like I'm new on the commission. It's taken me a while to learn a lot, and I'm still learning and happy to be here. It's been about a year, and finished up someone else's term. I've run a sports rehab center for about 24 years, and a chiropractor. And prior to this commission, the governor's office invited me to be on a commission for the chiropractic board, which I declined because something opened up in the disability community, and so I served there for 6 years on the state council for developmental disabilities as the chair. So I'm very passionate about the disability community and what I can do to make a difference. And I do, most importantly, I have 3 kids, a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 12-year-old that's turning 13 tomorrow. That's already 6'2". So he's taller than everybody, including my husband. Our 17-year-old has Down syndrome and is autistic, and she's doing fabulous. She's the first gal with a special needs to become a cheerleader at El Dorado High School, and is doing phenomenal. She's a swimmer for Special Olympics, and I also serve as a board member for Special Olympics. This is my 2nd year as well. So, I'm just happy to be here, happy to learn, happy to make a difference in any way I can, and I'm happy that we have 2 other individuals that come in to get to support all the kids that need support as well. So, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dawn Hamilton, one of the new ones, obviously. I just found out on Thursday that I was invited to join. And I am so honored and excited to be here that I'm actually missing my daughter's 9th birthday today. So my daughter, Emerson, has severe cerebral palsy, and she's in the 3rd grade. She goes to Chime, so I'm here as a parent, offering my parent perspective. I actually have had a really good experience with school. Emerson has been a part of a fully inclusive program from the time she was 18 months old, and she loves school. She has a ton of friends. She has the full childhood experience, surrounded by people who love her, and we just had her birthday party on Saturday. She had 10 friends singing karaoke and holding a microphone for her, and they got their manicures and their pedicures and had a great time. In a previous life, I did public relations first at an agency, and then I had my own PR business, and slowly my time has been taken over by Emerson and all of her outlets and activities and advocating for her and others with disabilities. And right now, because she's school age, that really revolves around education for me. And I got involved with the Chime Institute board, which I've sat on for the last 2 years. And in that, I've learned a lot more about kind of what goes on in this vast metropolis of education in the state. And when I heard about this opportunity, I felt like this was really an opportunity for me to bring my voice to the table on a bigger scale. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, before we have Kristen Wright officially swear you in, I'm going to make a pledge to both of you because we are many of us educators, or we're talking about educational things, and that world, it has its own language of acronyms. So we will all make a pledge to try our very best to spell out what acronyms are, because it will likely be that many of them you won't know, and they roll off of our tongue like, frequent words. So please ask us, however, if we make a mistake and we're talking about a whole subject in which we haven't introduced it properly, and I promise that we'll do our best. And I want to also say how important it is to have the parent perspective in these conversations. So never feel like you should hold back and wait and see what the people that are working in education are saying, because I can remember, was it Mercedes? Is that right here? She was a mom. She's a commissioner. Morena. I can remember Morena, who would listen so intently to some pretty deep and involved education conceptual issues, and then she would just quietly, open her microphone and have a point of view, and all of us would go, well, that's right. And so it's really important that you share your perspective, because it can be so invaluable in guiding our conversations. We need to officially swear you in now, and Kristen White is going to take that duty over for us.
Why don't you guys stand up here? And I will stand right here. And then everyone can see you swearing in. This is, can you hear me? Okay. This is the Advisory Commission on Special Education oath for the Office of Advisory Commission on Special Education. So repeat after me. I, Janine. I, Christine. I, Dawn. We can say this together after I say it to you. Ready? Do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter. Congratulations, you are sworn in.
Well, I'm off to a really good start, Gina, because we're already behind in time. I do have some morning business, though. We need to ask any of our commissioners if you would be willing to be an election officer, which means that you will be collecting nominations for the chair and vice chair by June, so that we can vote on them in August. So it's not a, we just looked at bylaws. It's not a committee, it's an actual officer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just quick correction to the timeline. We will receive nominations in April for voting in June in terms of action. And then the new officers would begin in August at the beginning of their term.
Anyone interested? Anyone willing to do that? Just make sure we keep to that timeline. Thank you so much. All right, so Aaron will make note that Janine and Steve will take care of that business. And also, just some real quick conversations to be thinking about, and let me know maybe a little bit later. We have some liaison positions. I know I served for the assessment division, and that required, I was a participant in a monthly phone call, and I think 2 in-person meetings per year. If anyone's interested in assessment, that liaison position would be available. And also, state board, I think, would be helpful if we could have someone be able to attend state board meetings or keep track of what they're doing. So if those sound interesting to you, make sure you just come and talk to me at some point, and we can move those ideas forward. Also, Aaron, let me know that you all should have received an email about the Form 700. And if any of you have completed that and would like to turn it into Aaron, he can accept that today from you. All right, so now we pass to David, and he will review the agenda.
So, working from page 3 of the agenda packet this morning, item 1, we have an update and need to take action on the California State Systemic Improvement Plan. The next item is an update on our annual performance report. After the APR report, we'll break for lunch. We will then hear item 3, an update on the California School Dashboard and Accountability System as it relates to special ed. And then we will take lunch. We don't have 2 lunches, that's my mistake. Lunch will be from noon to 1:30. From 1:30 to 1:45, we're going to recognize some commissioners who will be terming out. Item 5, we're happy to have the Department of Finance provide an update on the governor's budget. Item 6, we'll be looking at a legislative update. Moving into item 7, where we'll be planning our committee work. And then item 8, our committee meetings for the leg and policy meetings will be meeting from 3:15 till 4 o'clock. Moving into tomorrow's agenda. And just a reminder for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the meeting starts at 10 o'clock today. Tomorrow we begin the proceedings at 9 o'clock. You can see the administrative items starting at 9 in terms of call to order. At 9:15 tomorrow, we'll have an update on the statewide system of support from Dr. Carla Estrada from the collaborative, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. After that, we will have an update on AB 2657 regarding pupil discipline and restraint and seclusion. Item 13, we'll have an opportunity to hear from commissioners around work that may have happened since our last meeting. We will hear from the State Special Ed Director. We'll close with public comment before we plan to move into building our agenda, soliciting items for future agendas before we adjourn.
Thank you, David. Full day today, and we're already behind in time. So I'm going to make a very quick introduction to Stacy Whedon, who's going to be presenting us an update on the California State Systemic Improvement Plan update. This will be presented to the State Board of Education in March. So this is actually an action item. And so we'll have some discussion, and hopefully we'll be in a position where we can approve and send them on their way to the State Board. Thank you, Stacy.
Good morning. So I'm with you, April. I am just emerging from a very bad cold. So this is my first day back. I'm going to try to be really energetic and talk slowly and walk you through the State Systemic Improvement Plan this year. So let's start with some of the basics, because I know we have some new faces here and some new faces maybe in the audience, and they're like, what is the State Systemic Improvement Plan? So let me go over some of that briefly and take you back in time. So the State Systemic Improvement Plan is a requirement under the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I'm going to do my best not to use acronyms, but there are some doozies in here. I'm just going to warn you. The State Systemic Improvement Plan serves as indicator 17 of our annual performance report that we submit to the Office of Special Education Programs each year. The plan is a comprehensive multi-year plan focused on improving results for our students with disabilities in this state. So what is the annual performance report? The SIP is part of the annual performance report. What is that? The IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, requires us to submit basically a progress report each year, and that's our annual performance report. where we evaluate how we're doing as a state in implementing the provisions of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Shiloh, I think, was here last time talking about the annual performance report, and she's coming back right after me. And when she's talking about the annual performance report, she's really referencing indicators 1 through 16. The State Systemic Improvement Plan is indicator 17. I think I'm skipping ahead. It's very different in nature than the other indicators in the annual performance report because it is a plan. So as you can see, I think you guys all hopefully had a chance to review the report. It's a 27-page narrative report, whereas the rest of the indicators are really numerical measures, targets, calculations. So it's a little bit different way to approach how we're measuring our success in the state. Let's see. So the APR, the annual performance report, went before the board in January for approval. The State Systemic Improvement Plan is on a little bit of a different timeline than the rest of the annual performance report, and that comes from the Office of Special Education Programs. So it's treated a little bit differently as well, just because it's so different in its nature. The State Systemic Improvement Plan is intended to cover 6 years. So from fiscal year 13-14, that's when we first developed this plan, all the way through 18-19. So this should have been my last time coming before the commission and telling you all about our progress in implementing this particular 6-year plan. As Shiloh may have mentioned, the Office of Special Education Programs has told us that they need us to extend our targets under the current annual performance report state performance plan, which means that we will probably likely have another year of implementing this particular state systemic improvement plan. So I get to come back next year and tell you about all the other progress we've made in this particular plan. And in the future, we're waiting to hear some direction from the Office of Special Education Programs, but there will likely be an opportunity to sort of reconceptualize how we approach the state systemic improvement plan in the future. We were thinking maybe that was this year. It looks like maybe it'll be next year, but just to put that on your radar. So the state systemic improvement plan was developed in phases over the past 6 years, and it has evolved to align to the various changes that the state has undergone related to our system of support and how we're building that out. The overall purpose and the goal of our state systemic improvement plan initially and continuing is to achieve coherence and alignment across the state and federal systems to address the needs of our students with disabilities, to really realize that one system of education that we all talk about. It's a very lofty goal, but we're getting there. So this is a quick grid that just kind of gives you a snapshot of the history and the different phases that we've accomplished. Phase 1 was an analysis of the data and basically telling Office of Special Education Programs, here's where we want to focus our efforts and here's why. Phase 2 was an implementation plan. Here's how we're going to do what we say we're going to do. And then phase 3 is the implementation and evaluation phase. So we're in the tail end of phase 3 now. We're in year 4 of phase 3. And again, we're probably going to have a year 5. So this particular submission is really a progress report in front of you. So it's basically telling the Office of Special Education Programs, here's everything that's happened over the last year, all the work that we've done to implement the SIP in the last year. So, little history lesson. What was happening back in 2013-14 when we were developing the State Systemic Improvement Plan? Answers on the slide, pop quiz. Local control funding formula was really driving all of the educational policy conversations at that time. So when the Office of Special Education Programs came out with this new requirement that every state have a plan to address the outcomes for students with disabilities, it was really an opportunity. It was kind of our ticket to the party, right? We leveraged the State Systemic Improvement Plan to say, hey, we're doing all of these wonderful things. We're reconceptualizing how we as a state support districts to serve students, all students. So students with disabilities shouldn't be separate from that. Let's do it all at once. Let's talk about all students in the context of improvement activities at the local educational agency level. So the SIP was drafted to ensure that improvement strategies for students with disabilities were not separate. So we never intended to do something separate and different under the State Systemic Improvement Plan than what was happening in the larger accountability world and conversations. And the original State Systemic Improvement Plan theory of action reflects this intent. So this is my favorite slide because if you go back, and there's a link to the original theory of action in the report, you'll see that it is a pretty graphic, has a lot of words, a lot of bubbles, and I tried to squeeze it into a sentence to put on a slide. So this is really sort of high level, and if you want to go back and look at the theory of action in detail, you certainly can by clicking on that link. But essentially, I'm going to read this to you, it's a mouthful. If accountability efforts and resources are aligned to ensure that evidence-based improvement strategies are included in comprehensive improvement plans, wink, wink, the local control accountability plans, to meaningfully address students with disabilities along with their peers, then students with disabilities performance outcomes will improve. So that was sort of our big, if we do all of these things, then this should happen very neatly and nicely. And actually, we've done a lot of great work to fulfill that theory of action. So why did we think that this was the appropriate direction at that time? In 13-14, and you guys have heard about the overlap in our different student populations, and I'm giving you some updated 18-19 data just to show that when we're talking about the local control funding formula student subgroups, foster youth, low-income students, and English language learners, we're talking about students with disabilities. And so this is some updated figures to show that the overlap persists. It wasn't just an anomaly. Every year we see sort of similar figures. So 13% of students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged have an IEP. That's 1 in 8 students. 17% of English learners have an IEP, 1 in 6 students. And 28% of foster youth have an IEP, 1 in 4 students. So what does that mean? 70% of students with disabilities are in one or more of the local control funding formula student subgroups. So when we're talking about local control funding formula, we're talking about the system of support, we're talking about the local control accountability plans, and we're talking about how to support LEAs. We're talking about how to support LEAs to serve students with disabilities as well as those student subgroups. So that's why we thought this is the right thing, the right direction to go in. So quick summary of phase 2, it was our implementation plan. That's basically where we just sort of laid out the mechanics of how we're intending to do what we want to do here. So we outlined changes to the state infrastructure. We addressed plans to support LEAs to integrate improvement efforts for students with disabilities. So that's sort of back in time. And just so you know, if you're interested in looking at prior SIP submissions, if you really want to read a lot about the SIP, you can go back on the State Board of Education meeting website, look at their prior agendas. It always goes before the board in March of every year. So you can see each of the 6 years are submissions if you're interested. So what phase are we currently in? We're in phase 3. We are implementing the SIP. As I said before, it's supposed to span 4 years. It looks like we're going to do another year under this SIP, which is A-okay with us. This is a quick overview of how the report's organized. You guys can see that when you read it. And this is basically, it's mirroring the Office of Special Education Programs. They gave us an outline to follow basically in writing the report. So that's what that is. So I'm going to jump right into sort of the meat of the report. So that's the history lesson. Now, what did we do over the last year under the State Systemic Improvement Plan? Really, the report focuses on and highlights the work that we've done under the statewide system of support to build up resources and capacity for LEAs specific to students with disabilities. And what that means is basically we highlighted the work of our special education resource leads. Those are our SELPA Special Education Local Plan Area Leads. So we have our system improvement leads and we have our content leads in various areas. So our good friend and partner, Carla Estrada, is going to be here tomorrow to tell you about the work of the leads in more detail. So I'm going to blow through these slides, but I felt like the work that they're doing is so incredible that I wanted to honor them and give them a slide in my presentation as well. So we have our system improvement leads and the report goes into more detail as well. And we highlighted the work that they're doing to build capacity in SELPAs across the state, including their publishing the State Performance Plan Indicator Guide, which has served to be a really great resource, not only for the field, but also for our staff too. We use it. So that's been great. We have Imperial County as our SELPA content lead, addressing students with disabilities who are also English language learners. And I'm almost positive you guys have heard about or had a presentation on the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. We published that in July of last year, and so Imperial County has really helped to take that and build capacity, build trainings and workshops around that guide, and that's been really beneficial. We have Marin County SELPA in partnership with CAPTAIN, the California Autism Professional Training and Information Network, and they are working to infuse the system with some evidence-based practices related to serving students with autism. We have our content lead, the Open Access Project from Placer County. They're building capacity around universal design for learning, assistive technologies, and augmentative alternative communication. And then we have our SELPA content lead on disproportionality, and one of the exciting things that they're doing is they're working to design a predictive disproportionality data tool for local educational agencies to be really proactive in addressing some of the issues that may cause them to be disproportionate in special education. So it's really great work. And I have to say it was a real pleasure to draft this report because it's sort of this year has been a little bit of a culmination of all of this conceptualizing. And, you know, back 6 years ago, we were talking really in the abstract about how we thought this might look and what we could do. And now actually we see the wheels are turning, work is happening, and the system is really, you know, doing some great things and making great strides in supporting LEAs regarding our students with disabilities. So update on action items. Each year in the SIP submission, we have to tell the Office of Special Education Programs, here's what we intend to do next year. And so all that section is just telling them we did what we said we were going to do. And so in the past year, we continue to partner with the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. The Special Education Division, specifically, we are constantly seeking opportunities to align our own practices, whether that be our monitoring activities, our data analyses, to whatever's happening in the larger accountability system, the dashboard, California School Dashboard, and the system of support. And I don't know if Shiloh's in the room yet, but we last year successfully transitioned to a single data collection system for all students, including students with disabilities. And that's case Mr. CalPads. And I have that written out on a future slide. I'm not even going to try to say that because I don't remember. It's a long acronym. So, but stay tuned. So that was something that we said we were going to do, and we certainly did, and that's been wonderful. Data on implementation and outcomes. So every year we use the same evaluation questions just for consistency's sake. And this is really sort of an activity in self-reflection on, you know, and we ask ourselves the same questions. You can read it in the report. And we ask ourselves, in the past year, how has the system of support been impacted by the goals of the SIP and so on? So that's just a snapshot of that. Data on implementation and outcomes. So the Office of Special Education Programs is always interested in seeing, in having us demonstrate really, so you're doing all this great work at the statewide level, how is that impacting the students, right? So it's really hard in a state this size to quantify and to say that what we're doing way up here is having a direct impact on, you know, Johnny and Sarah in the classroom. And that's ultimately what we want. It's just very hard to do. So to, you know, as a nod to the Office of Special Education Programs, what we did in this year's report was similar to what we did in last year's report. We took 2 of our statewide projects, our Supporting Inclusive Practices project and our California Scale Up Multi-Tiered System of Support Statewide Initiative, otherwise known as the SUMS Initiative. And we highlighted those 2 projects. And what was really great and interesting this year is that both of those projects have been doing work for enough years where they're starting on their own to dip their toe into the water of saying, can we demonstrate that there's some sort of impact on student achievement scores specifically or outcomes in general, right? And so they had already done some of that work on their own, and you can read that in the report. It's still really premature to say one way or the other to make that direct connection. The work that we're doing here is causing, you know, this huge bump in assessment scores or whatever it may be. But nonetheless, they are starting to look at that, and so it was really nice to be able to share some of that preliminary data in the report. I will tell you, for Supporting Inclusive Practices project, there's a little piece in the report that was really cool. We featured Arcadia Unified School District, who has worked with our Supporting Inclusive Practices project for quite some time, and they have some really compelling numbers. They've seen some significant gains in achievement scores or proficiency scores for their students with disabilities at certain school sites. And just verbally, in my talking with them, I asked them, you know, do you attribute some of that success to your work with our Supporting Inclusive Practices project? And they said, absolutely, no question about it. So that was really cool to put in the report. Office of Special Education Programs wants us to address data quality issues. They want us to continuously pursue data quality, which we already do. But, you know, one of the challenges to evaluating our SIP is, again, just the broad sweeping nature, trying to quantify, trying to make that line. A lot of other states took a very sort of narrow targeted approach to their state systemic improvement plan and focused on a very narrow population, so it's a little bit easier for them to assign numbers to that. California, we did what worked for us at the time, and it really has worked for us, and we took a big bite. So it continues to be a challenge for us, but Office of Special Education Programs is understanding more and more every year why we did what we did. Efforts to ensure data quality, as I said, here it is. Integration of the California Special Education Management Information System, CASEMIS, into California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System, CalPADS. So now it's just CalPADS. That's collecting student data for all students, including students with disabilities. And along with that integration of the data systems, there's increased number of data validations. It will naturally lead to increased data quality for us throughout the state, which we're happy about. So, progress towards achieving intended improvements. When we developed our state systemic improvement plan, we had to decide on a state-identified measurable result. And that was, what are you as a state going to look at? What figure, what number are you going to look at to see if you're actually making a difference in outcomes? And so we, our SIMR, state-identified measurable result, is percent proficiency for all students with disabilities in the state in English, language arts, and math. So we've been looking at those figures every year. And I'm very happy to say that in the last year, we saw a bump across the board. So it was about 1 percentage point across the board in both domains. But as I like to remind people, 1 percentage point in California is, 7,000 to 8,000 kiddos. So it's, we can smile about that. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm happy to report that to the Office of Special Education Programs that we did see a little bit shift in the right direction. So our plans for next year, since we're going to do this again next year, which is okay, we're going to remain engaged in activities and efforts related to the system of support, particularly in supporting the work of the special education resource leads. We're going to maximize internal and external partnerships as appropriate to achieve our collective goals. And we will continue to streamline and integrate monitoring processes and improvement activities within the division and within our department to make sure that our students with disabilities remain, front and center in all the conversations about how we support districts in the state. So next steps, should you recommend that this move forward to the board, this will move forward to the board for approval next month in March. And then we will submit, I believe our submission date to the Office of Special Education Programs is April 1st. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments at this time.
Well, Stacy, first I want to, having had the cold twice, you've done very well.
Thank
for
you.
your first day back to work.
And let me just say, I'm very excited to have Aaron working with me, and I told him to throw stuff at me if I started babbling on the cold medicine.
So whatever that over-the-counter cold medicine that you're taking, you'll have to share because it's a bad cold going on.
My dad's a pharmacist, so
yeah, there you go. Anyway, any questions from commissioners? Gina?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say that you just did a masterful job of taking a federal document and requirement and making it so tangible and relevant to our day-to-day work. So thank you for the way that you took this and made it this.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Just want to second that comment and thank you for going back in history because a lot has happened since 13-14. And being an observer and watching CDE be very transparent around reorganization efforts, focusing on different priorities and watching that translate into actual work into the field and the messaging, it really does speak to that continuous improvement commitment that we've made around identifying problems and then moving forward and collecting data to confirm we're moving in the right direction. So thank you for sharing.
Great job, Stacy. So Stacy has done an incredible job of trying to take a lot of information, trying to attain systems coherency when you've lived in a siloed world is a big undertaking. And it was fortunate for us that we had the tales of the Special Education Task Force and other efforts in the state to be able to really maximize the momentum of being able to do this work. And so being able to actually have the vehicle of the state systemic improvement plan to sort of quantify it has also helped because it's provided a level of legitimacy and a reason for us to bring forward information in a way that is a requirement, first of all, but it's also been exciting work to try to figure out how we can use this to leverage our entry into more conversations. And I think our state has been incredibly open And we've had a lot of support across all the policy-making bodies from the top down around making sure that special ed is truly included. And I hope you have all felt that way over the last few years, because we certainly have, to the point where, you know, it's great being invited to every meeting, and now we're invited to every meeting, and how, you know, it's a great problem to have. So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that and all the work that's been done by both our special education division staff, which have had to be very flexible over the last few years in their own work, with a lot of changes that we've made, and also the field and the SELP organization and our special ed directors across the state, who's also had to be very flexible. This year, Shiloh will talk a little bit about it later, but you know, as we merged our special ed data system into CalPads, as you can imagine, it wasn't like a perfect puzzle pieces coming together. We have a lot of nuances in special education that I think no one could ever have imagined, and so we're still working with our local educational agencies to try to ensure that the data and all that is able to be submitted in a way that's meaningful. So we still have some work to do this year, but it's been a major undertaking, and a lot of people who've committed their time in prioritizing special education and students with disabilities to make this happen. Because as you know, in any set of initiatives, and we're doing still a lot of changes to our education system, things have to get prioritized. And so I think you'll see some nice signals over the next couple of days that special education continues to be a very, very high priority. And so we're just happy to be playing in the game, and I think this is a good sort of memorialization of that.
I was thinking when you were giving your presentation, you know those books that you read as a child, but they inform you as an adult, like Winnie the Pooh informs me as an adult. There's a favorite book of mine called The Important Book by Margaret Wise Brown. She wrote Runaway Bunny, and that book settles me down when I start going in too many different directions, because I'll stop and think, but just focus on the important thing, the important thing, the important thing, you know, keep the important thing important. And I like that you gave us that history from 2013. And I'm kind of proud of the fact that we landed on some concepts back then that I still feel are the important thing. You know, I'm at a school site every day, and the important thing to me is LRE and MTSS. That's really the important thing to me. So many times in education, we don't often land on the important thing, but it seems like the work that you've been doing, you know, started from that place and is reaching a culmination of keeping your eye on the important thing. And I love that, and I'm really appreciative of that. So thank you so much. I think we need to give you a little support. So commissioners, if you feel so inclined, is there anyone that would like to make a motion to approve the work?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the plan as presented in the packet.
I second.
Additionally, I would like to amend the motion to include a recommendation for state board approval of the plan.
So here's our shout out to Lester moment, right? When we need him to just be here with us and make sure we're doing it correctly. So I believe we had a motion to support the work that's been done in the proposal going before the state board. We had a second. So any discussion from commissioners? So Gina, do we take a vote now? Is that how that works? Okay. Any public comment? Okay. So I guess we're ready. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. So thank you so much for your presentation today. And we should be able to generate a letter for you to be able to take with you to the state board. Thank you so much. Well, look, we got right back on time, Gina. Gosh. Yeah, right. Do we have the next item ready? And we're a little early, actually. Are we? I'm not sure. Oh, Shiloh, I wasn't sure. Are you going to be presenting on the next item? Okay. I got different information. Okay. Are you ready, or do you need a little break? We'll bring Shiloh up. Our item number 2 is an update on the annual performance report. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shiloh.
Hello.
can never tell if this. Is this on? Can you guys hear me? Good. Okay. I can never tell. Good morning, Commissioners. For those of you who don't know me, although I think I know almost everybody here, my name is Shiloh Duncan Besserell. I'm the Data Administrator for Special Education. So my primary responsibility is to collect and report on all students with disabilities in California. And so today we're going to talk about one of the major pieces of work that we do around reporting, which is our annual performance report. This is a required report that we send to the U.S. Department of Education annually to ensure that we continue to receive our $1.2 or $3 billion in federal funds. Now, in October, every year I bring to you the results of that report. But today I'm going to talk about the process that we're going through right now to set up that report for the next 6-year cycle. So, and if you all have any questions as we go along, please feel free to ask them. I know you guys aren't shy, so I'm not too worried about that. So in the Code of Federal Regulations that are a part of that support the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it states in there that as part of the state performance plan, each state must establish measurable and rigorous targets for the indicators established by the Secretary. The way this works is that the U.S. Department of Education publishes every 6 years the indicators that will be used for that cycle, and the state is required to determine what those targets are for indicators that require targets. And I'm going to go through all of that. So you'll hear me refer to a couple of different words. One is the state performance plan, which is the plan we're setting up, and then the annual performance report, which is what we report on. So the state performance plan is setting the state targets for 6 years. So the U.S. Department of Education publishes what the indicators will be. We set forth a state performance plan that sets the targets for those indicators. And then every year we report on those targets and how we as a state in California are doing for students with disabilities on all of the indicators. There are 17 of them. And so when you read elements from us that we present to you, or when I come back here in October to present to you the annual performance report for next year, you'll hear me refer to both the SPP and the APR, because that's kind of what we're talking about here today. So just for some level setting, the current APR cycle goes through federal fiscal year 2013, which is the 2013-14 school year, through federal fiscal year 2018. So that was the most recent year. This is the 18-19 data year. We just presented that to you all in October, and it was presented to the State Board of Education in January for submission to the U.S. Department of Education on February 1st or 2nd this year. So as you can see, we are now at the end of a 6-year cycle. So our requirement now is to pull together a work group to begin working on the next years of targets. One of the things that we have faced, unfortunately, is that the U.S. Department of Education has not, as they have typically done in years past, yet published the next 6-year cycle of indicators. But knowing that as California, if we want to identify what the targets are going to be, engage stakeholders in a real meaningful way, we needed to get started now. We couldn't wait for the U.S. Department of Education to come out with their plan if we intended to begin to prepare an annual performance report for the 1920 school year. So we put together, I'm sorry, a little ahead of myself. So the purpose of the annual performance report annually is to provide data and context, describe our reporting requirements, look at the outcomes for students with disabilities, but it's always the what, it is not the why. So a lot of times I come up before you all, or I come before the State Board of Education, and I say, this is how we're doing with students with disabilities. And you all, as practitioners in the field, typically will say, well, why does that happen? What's happening? And my response is typically like, it's hard to say. It's hard to know, because we really identify the why. There's 6 million public education students in California on any given day. There are 800,000 students with disabilities receiving services in our classrooms on any given day in California. So we use a lot of quantitative data in order to make the determinations on how districts and LEAs are doing with those students. But the annual performance report is what the U.S. Department of Education uses to make the determination for us and how we're doing as a state. There are 17 indicators in the annual performance report. They're all listed here. Some of them are compliance and some of them are performance. I know it says 16 here, so don't get too excited. You're like finding an error. Our indicator 17 are a state systemic improvement plan, which was just presented to you by Stacy Woodine. It is not on the same timeline as the annual performance report. So these 16 indicators are actually submitted to the U.S. Department of Education every February, and this indicator 17, which is our state systemic improvement plan, is presented or is sent to the U.S. Department of Education in April. So we pulled together a set of stakeholder meetings to begin the process of identifying the indicators that we would be going through to set targets. As I've stated before, because California is a large state, it's very difficult to make changes to our data systems. And for those of you who've been around a while or who are aware of that, we did make a significant shift in our data collection system this year. We shuttered our California Special Education Management Information System, the system formerly known as ACSE, which had been in service since 1984. And we are now collecting all of the data for students with disabilities in CalPads, which is a much better place for us to collect them. It's tied to enrollment data and other types of program data, and it's longitudinal, meaning we can track students much better over time. But now we're not our little fish in our little pond anymore. We are a little fish in a great big ocean. And in order to make changes to CalPads, that typically requires 1 to 2 years in advance notice. So we started this year in looking at the targets for for the process of setting up the new targets for the upcoming year, the upcoming set of 6 years. We started in August thinking through what we would want to collect if this indicator stayed the same, and we set up this timeline that we would hold a set of stakeholder meetings. We would bring proposed targets to you all in this meeting, and then we would bring those targets to the State Board of Education in May. We would need to submit those targets next February. I will tell you that there has been a little bit of a hiccup, but I still want to walk you all through the process we're going through because it will change even if our requirements change. And so we'll kind of go through that in a moment. I'm not today bringing to you the proposed targets, and there's a very good reason for that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So we held 4 stakeholder meetings on different indicators. Not every indicator is an indicator for which we would set targets for. So only our performance indicators, and we'll kind of, they're outlined here, proficiency on statewide assessments, suspension, expulsion, least restrictive environment placement, early childhood settings, preschool assessment, post-school outcomes, dropout, parent involvement, resolution sessions, and mediation. All the other indicators are either indicators that are compliance, so they're set at 0 or 100%, or they're an indicator that's set by our ACSE state plan. That is graduation. So what happens at each of the meetings? We overview the indicator, we provided an explanation of the calculation, we did some comparison of state and national trend data, we did some current research and on considerations, we looked at some small group discussions, and we did a report out. And I'm going to sort of walk through the process that we went through for one indicator, so you all can see the data that we went through, kind of see the conversation that was occurring within the small groups. So we wanted to have folks gain an understanding of the state performance plan requirements, engage with other work group members, and bring the voice of their constituents. So we had groups present at this stakeholder group. They were representing, we had Gina from ACSE was there, we had folks from ACSE, we had folks from the SELPA, it was a really diverse stakeholder groups, including parents and members of the community also present. So these are the indicators that the work groups intended to discuss. They did discuss them, and we will likely be discussing them again once we go forward with the new indicators. So I want to kind of walk you through the process that we went through with the stakeholder groups. So I picked one indicator, and that was least restrictive environment. I know that's all a passion for many of you, so I thought that would be a really good place for us to look at these. And so I'm going to walk through how we worked with our stakeholder group on this set of data. So first, what we did was we introduced the indicator. And so at the end of this presentation, there's a link to our Padlet that we used for all of our materials. Our measurement table was up there as well. And so we walked through each indicator in this fashion. We introduced the indicator, what it was. Our indicator 5 was our least restrictive environment. It's made up of 3 elements: students who are in a regular class 80% or more of the day, students who are in a regular class less than 40% of the day, and students who are in a separate school, residential facility, or homebound hospital placement. There is an in-between category that is not reported as part of this indicator, and those are students who are in a regular class between 40 and 79% of the day. So we also walked through the calculation of each indicator. What's the numerator? What's the denominator? A lot of times when I go out into the field and I talk about indicators and how districts are selected for things or monitoring, I get a lot of questions on like, how did you pick us? Like, what was the magical thing that you did? And I was like, it's actually really simple. It's a percentage. It's the number of this over the total number. And this is a very good example of that. We take the number of students who are in each one of those categories divided by the number of students who are ages 6 through 21. We also looked at how the results and the targets were over the past 5 years. So the line you will see there, the straight line is the target, and the dotted line was our actual results of the past 5 years. So as you can see, and this is something that the stakeholder group brought up, was we set our target lower than our actual data at the beginning of this 6-year cycle. And so one of the things that we overwhelmingly heard from our constituents in the work group was, it really seems like we need to start where we're at. So don't start the target below. Let's start at where we're at. I can tell you, and I was not in this role when we set the initial set of targets for FFY 13, but I do know the conversations was, we want to be able to set targets that districts can achieve. Our previous least restrictive environment targets were around 76%, and many districts felt like those were so aggressive that if I was at 40%, I was never going to reach it. It would take so much. And as a state, the one thing I do like to remind folks of is that every single percentage point that we change for least restrictive environment, so every time we increase this indicator 1%, that's 7,000 students who have more access to a general education classroom. So that's a lot. That's the entire student with disability population in San Francisco Unified. So that is a big change to think about. And so one of the things you have seen, if you've seen me here for a time, or if you took an opportunity to see the state board presentation, was in general for California, for students with disabilities, we're in the right direction. We're just not going as quickly as we would like. We want to make more gains. But in general, for most indicators, we are increasing the performance for students with disabilities and their outcomes. We also wanted to compare how students in California were doing versus the rest of the state. And as you can see, I know that this graph is a little bit of a misrepresentation, but our stakeholders wanted to see it much more closer than we had initially provided, so this is what we provided to them. But we are at about 55% in the state, and the national average is 10 points above that at 65%. So when we compare ourselves to the rest of the state, we're about 10% behind. And for us, that would be changing the least restrictive environment placement for about 70,000 students. We also looked at other types of states and how they were doing as well. And one of the things that we found was, in general, we were kind of similar to other states. We picked states that were both similar to us in size, similar to us in demographics, similar to us in political affiliations, because that makes a difference, and then similar to us in how they're made up. And so I'll kind of walk through each state. So Michigan is very much like this in that they had what's called intermediate education agencies. We call them SELPAs, Special Education Local Plan Areas. They have a different name for them, but they have them very similar to us, where they have these intermediate education agencies. Florida is very similar to us in both size and demographic. They're like the 4th largest state in terms of student with disability population, and their demographics tend to be relatively similar. New York and Texas are also very large, and Texas is very similar to us in the makeup of how districts are. They have both very large districts and very small districts. One difference between us and Florida is that Florida, every county is a district. So they only have, I think, like 41 districts in their state, which is different from when we have like 2,000. But Texas has, I think, right around 1,200. And then Washington is very similar to us in both geography and then also political affiliation. So we also wanted to bring that as an example. So as you can see, we're kind of on par with New York and Washington, and we're a little bit behind Michigan, Florida, and Texas. And then Florida is probably one of the higher of all the states that we've provided here. One of the things you will see is that for the most part, the states all headed in the same direction we did. And you'll also notice that the states also made relatively similar gains that we did, 1 percentage point or less per year. So it wasn't like we were much different, where we were making slow gains and everyone else was making the same gains. Larger states also struggle with this as well, is that to make changes by percentage requires a change for a lot of students. So you'll see that in both Texas and New York. They made changes, but those changes were very incremental. So the other question our stakeholders had was, how do the districts do? Like, if the red line is the target, how are districts doing? And so we found that, well, about half or so were doing better and half were doing worse. So it's definitely right at the midpoint. And the reason that we do this kind of chart is because you can have districts that are very large, like Los Angeles Unified or San Diego Unified, and if they have major changes or if they are not doing as well with putting students into regular classroom, it could make our percentages look smaller. But as you can see here, about half of the districts are above the line and about half are below. We also had a set of proposed targets that the LEAs, we asked the LEAs to draw out, not LEAs, the stakeholder groups to draw out where they thought the targets were. And so this is where we landed in terms of our targeting for the stakeholder groups. So they wanted us to start where we are now, which is at about 57, 56%, and to incrementally increase about 3 percentage points per year. So again, that would be about 20,000 students per year having more access to a general education classroom, being fully included. And so that would, in 2025, we would be at 73% of our students would be in a regular classroom greater than 80% of the day. And most of the districts felt like, or not districts, keep saying that, most of the stakeholders felt like this was both rigorous but achievable over time. So we went through this process with all of those indicators. So it was a really intensive process, and I'm sure Gina can speak to that because she was there for the meetings where these were full day meetings with these stakeholders, some of them traveling. We did a virtual option as well, so folks could listen in and participate. But these were really intensive meetings where folks were looking at data, having internal discussions, reporting out, drawing out, providing feedback. We also allowed the opportunity for stakeholders to take the information and provide us written feedback later on, going back to their constituencies, their groups that they represented, and bringing back the information. So this was a really intensive process, and the feedback we received from the stakeholders was that it was, although very intensive, it was really helpful for them to understand the indicators, to understand how we can make changes to them and improve them, and how we can set really rigorous but achievable targets. So we were on track. We prepared a report. I was getting ready to get it all ready for you all to look at as proposed targets. And then the U.S. Department of Education came out with some changes. They said, you know, we're not ready to publish the new sets of 6-year targets. indicators yet. And they've been sort of dancing around the idea that they will make changes to some of the indicators, but we had heard no confirmation. For example, I think that there might be some changes in how we look at students who are aged 5 but are in kindergarten, because right now they're included in all of the preschool indicators, and so I think that there's a push at the U.S. Department of Education to include them in the school age indicators. So that's one change we could see. So they informed us in October that we would be submitting extension targets. So we couldn't rebench the targets, meaning make new baselines for the targets. We would just have to extend the targets, which is what we did. We took our targets and we extended them at whatever percentage they would be. And that was presented at the state board meeting in January. So if you haven't had the opportunity to take a look at that, I would take a look at it. It's a good opportunity to see where we landed in terms of the FFY19 data, which is this 1920 data. The U.S. Department of Education let us know that they will publish sometime in December the new targets. December has come and gone. January came and gone. In January, they said, oh, we think we're going to publish them sometime in the spring, which obviously worries me a little bit because the sometime in the spring could go all the way into June. And as you know, if they're going to make changes to how we have to collect and report the data, we need to know as soon as possible because that new school year starts July 1. So I'm a little bit nervous that we're not going to get those anytime soon, but really we hope that they will be. So we do know that we had to extend targets for FFY 2019. We reported those in February of 2021. And then we will report on new targets next year, hopefully. So what's next in this process? For us, that's really going to be waiting for the new sets of targets, the new sets of indicators to come out, and then we'll reconstitute that stakeholder group and determine if there are indicators that have made major changes, we will go ahead and convene the stakeholder group to work on targets for those. If there are indicators that have not made changes, we will likely review those targets with the stakeholder group and see if they continue to approve them so that they can be presented to the state board. But that will likely happen very quickly once we get the packet because we will not have very much time. So, does anyone have any questions? That process?
So the understanding the Fed process and the short turnaround, potentially finding out in June and needing to implement by July. So my assumption is we should support this effort by making sure the field knows that there may be changes in the targets next year. Yeah. Would those new targets be the targets used for the mega letter next year?
No, they would not.
Okay.
So that is actually the really good news for the field is that we are sort of almost 1 year in arrears when we had to do, we use the most current data that we have, but so when we're talking about FFY 19, that's the 1920 data, which is what's being collected now. So we will report on that next year, and then we'll be collecting 2021 data that will be reported on the following year. It's a little bit confusing, but we won't use the new targets until the 21-22 monitoring year.
I'll ask for questions from the commissioners first, but also public. We will take public comments after each item on the agenda since we don't have that segmented time. So please submit your questions if you have any. Any questions or comments from any of the commissioners? Michelle?
I know it's a why question, so I'm sorry. But I'm just curious about that 10% difference between LRE in our state and other states. You said that in general. Is there a why for that? Is there any big areas that we can point to?
Well, I think size is a big one, right? So when we're compared to Maryland versus compared to us, it's easier to make percentage changes. So that is all the states compared to one state. So it is a big difference. I think There has been some more aggressive positions taken in the past for states around increasing access to special education. It's easier when you're a state like Florida, when you only have 41 entities to work with to improve, versus us working with 2,200 local control LEAs and charter schools. So those things make more, but I think we are moving in the right direction over time. And I think the efforts that we have coming out, some of the things that are coming in the budget, I know Kristen can speak to that around supporting inclusive practices and things like that. Those will help districts move in the way we want them to.
Right, yeah, because just giving a number target, it's so challenging for schools, because if you're like, great, I have to do that, but if nobody's quite sure how to do that effectively, it ends up, not being a good move for anybody and maybe not taken all the time. So the support, best models.
And that was one of the biggest things that we heard in the state board meeting when we presented this information, or not this set of information, but the annual performance report, was like, we understand the data, now let's talk more about the how.
And I think that's, if from a larger theory of action perspective, the state's leveraging not just let's have, more kids included, but what are all the barriers that they're trying to overcome? Everything from teacher credentialing to funding to
training and best practices.
Every possible thing that is contributing to access and inclusion is being addressed at the larger level. So I don't think there's one thing. I think there's a lot of variables that go into it, and so I'm excited that I think we'll be making a lot of progress. We have seen a lot of data around results for kids that have had more access, just in terms of their outcomes and how they've done on assessment.
Just flat out for self-efficacy, kids, even if they're still struggling academically, just being around the higher standards of a gen ed classroom changes their perspective of themselves and what they can do. So it's just, it feels a little bit overwhelming when you have to sell that to a lot of teachers who feel, I don't know, that every child has to meet this standard, and they're confused about how to differentiate and maybe put in some of those UDL strategies. So more work along those lines would be super helpful. But thank you.
April?
I'll attempt this with a throat lozenge in my mouth this time. Nice to see you.
It's good.
Happy New Year. So, we're experiencing this currently right now in our district, and they're excited at the higher district level of seeing this happen. And one of the things that we see is the curriculum being modified. When you have a teacher in the classroom that has 30-some kids, and you have a case manager that's handling all of these cases, and they tend to want to have all these kids in their own STC class because it's easier for them, where we want our kids to be included, to have access to all the curriculum and modified, but yet you've got one caseworker that says, no, it's better to have them all here with me so that I can manipulate or modify the curriculum. So it is a lot of things, but one is to have access to curriculum that's going to help that child be successful and not fall short. And, it's setting them up for failure. And
I would say one thing that we're planning to do in the future, we're working very closely with our accountability division to try and show the data that's attached to outcomes for students with disabilities. So what happens is you see the outcomes for students with disabilities on a dashboard, but you don't see the under part of that data, which is like their least restrictive environment and things like that. That's located somewhere else. And so if we can get some of that data, even just like, hey, do you want more information? Click on this and it'll bring up the district's annual performance report so they can begin to dissect this. One of the challenges that a lot of districts have is they don't have statisticians on at the district to be able to run like by school, by school type, by disability, the LRE or the suspension or those kinds of things. And it's that kind of really good analysis that helps districts really go into where they need to improve.
And one of the things that that is in the works, and I think actually online now, is our system SELPA improvement leads. One of their charges was to help to create a tool that districts can go into and actually get that information that Shiloh's talking about and look over time about what their trajectory is, so that as they're looking at what their own plans for improvement in special education are, they can actually see that underbelly data. So it's sort of our next step, and exactly what Shiloh's talking about, which is in order for people to truly understand where they are, they have to be able to see their data. And it in the past has been sort of this hidden underbelly data that, you hear about on the larger perspective. Hi, Kelly. So anyway, I think that there is some real progress being made. Into Shiloh's point, I think the more we're able to arm folks, especially in their LCAP processes and others, with the special education specific data, the more that they'll be able to be intentional about their improvement strategies.
I just wanted to say that as things turn out, Sarah and I met on this commission, and we were geographically not in the same school district, and then we ended up in the same school district. So, well, she was in my hometown school district. I moved back to my hometown. So we matched back up again, two like-minded people. And, we had this conversation a couple years ago about, really trying to turn the corner into more push and model. So we were able to implement that at my school. And then I was happy to be able to share that, anecdotally, I was sitting in IEPs where children were making, a year's growth, year and a half growth, which we had not been seeing that kind of growth in their previous IEPs, right? So very exciting stuff. And then I'm at a different school, same district, different school now, and, getting to know that culture. And when I can walk into a classroom, which I did last week, and see the special education teacher pushing in for a math group and working with all students in that classroom, so that, my kiddos with IEPs were not they were indistinguishable from anyone else. So they no longer had to go to a different place. They no longer had to feel, even within their own classroom, that they were being serviced differently. But she was using different strategies when they went through with her. And, it was a beautiful thing. And it was really great to see your slide that showed the improvement. And even if we're 10% below other states, we are a big state. And I understand the math there, and it's hard to move that percentage point. But to see that we were above target was really, really heartwarming. I was kind of, I liked the scatter graph that you did. However, there was some dots at the 0. And I thought, so where are we if there's districts with 0? And are they specialized school districts that they just land there because that's where they are, because they're unique?
Like the county offices of education.
Okay. So that answers my question. I'm like, how could someone be 0? So anyway, I think we're making progress. I do, and it's really great to hear some good news and see some good data. And I thank you for doing all that work in that regard. Do we have any public comments on this topic?
I have one public comment request card from Ed Amundsen from CTA.
Good morning, Commissioners. Ed Amundsen. I'm the CTA liaison of the Committee of Practice and Secondary Transition. Pardon my relatively casual attire, but I came by to see the boss, Barbara Schulman, as she left. But before we engage in a lot of flagellation over this issue, Commissioner, you had a good question about some of the differences as you look at the states. And I want to draw your attention, if you go back to slide 19, and you look at two specifically, the states Florida and Texas. And there's some factors that need to be considered or should be looked at. Is in Florida, they have a voucher program that students can go to any school that they choose. Many of them are non-public, independent charter schools, which have a different reporting mandate than we would have in the public schools. So those numbers could be affected by that. And if you look at Texas, back under No Child Left Behind and ESSA, because of some of the implications of penalties for outcomes for students with disabilities, in Texas in particular, there were numerous pushes in many districts to reduce the number of students identified for special education, so they would not necessarily be in some of the reporting data. So it's something to consider before we think we haven't done enough, that there are other factors in these states that could have impacted how their numbers are so high. The other one I want to go back to is on slide 17. When we look at there was that significant drop in 2014 in the percentage of kids in the general ed environment, that was right in the middle of CASE. Remember, during that time when we were going through CASE, many students, in order to get waivers, in order to graduate, had to have extra support, extra math, extra English. So their opportunities in the general ed classroom decreased. And then once we dealt with the CASE and that was not an impact, then you see the numbers begin to go up. So I think from my perspective as looking at these, those are numbers I think we need to look at carefully as we evaluate what looked like a failure, but was actually success. And there were other external factors that could have impacted that. I just wanted to share with that with you because you had a very good question about why the differences. And those are things that aren't reported in the data. It's a great report, but those kind of things aren't going to be explained well in the data. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I want to say that I think that if we set a target of, looks like just under 50%, if that was our target and we surpass that target, that's great news. And 58% of students serving 80% or more of their day in the least restrictive environment is in a state this big is that's a lot of students. Like you said, 7,000 students are moved at 1 percentage point, right? So that's 7,000 lives that are very different than they were prior to that. And also I took a lot of pride in the fact that when you were working with your stakeholder groups, that if you're saying that they felt comfortable with this target, that by 2025, we should be able to get to 73%. That's an enormous amount of lives that will be changed by that work. So I think that that's a very positive way of looking at the path forward and promising, really promising. So that's great. Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
So I did want to just also, I included the link, and it's kind of light here. It always looks brighter on my computer. But that link is a live link to all the materials we used for all of the stakeholder groups, and folks are welcome. It's a publicly available link. Those folks are welcome to look at the materials that we used for the stakeholder group if they have more questions or wanted to dig in. But we will come back when we have all of the indicators from the U.S. Department of Education and our stakeholders have weighed in on them.
Thank you so much, Shiloh.
Thank you.
Gina, I want you to notice the time. I needed that affirmation. Get back on track. It's 11:30. We are now going to be hearing about our school dashboard and accountability system. And I'd like to just preface it by sharing my own journey as I became chair and how I thought about these presentations a little bit differently when I was the one sitting here introducing people and feeling protective of them. And I was reflecting a little bit with Kristen about how sometimes the people that come up to talk about our data and our accountability, they can deliver us some news that all of us can have an emotional reaction towards. And I feel for them at times, and it's a don't shoot the messenger kind of a feeling. And so I was feeling a little bit badly about that. And then Kristen helped me understand that if we don't look at it, we can't change what we don't know. So it's important that we see what they share with us, and then every one of us has the ability to provide information to the field about, action steps that might be taken to turn some of these numbers around. And I guess I'm feeling better about introducing this group, having just come off of Shiloh's presentation where I was able to see some good news. And so I feel like this is all surrounding all of this accountability and data. And even though sometimes it's hard to hear, often what you present to us is not what we would like to be seeing in terms of the experiences of students with disabilities. It is important that we hear about it, that we know it, and that we use our voices to implement any kind of change that we can suggest or recommend from there. So thank you for always being willing to come and present to us. We appreciate all the work that you do.
while Sima sets up here. My name is Betty Mura. I work in the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. I'm here today with my colleague Sima Salovich. Unfortunately, Cindy Kazanis, our division director, as well as Jenny Singh, whom I believe a lot of you know, our administrator, they are attending the Equity Conference down in Southern California today. So we are here on their behalf.
Okay. And I'm Sima Salovich. Thank you for having us. So over the next 30 minutes, we will be looking at the 2019 dashboard results, focusing specifically on statewide results and outcomes for students with disabilities. And based on those results, we'll be looking at LEAs that were identified for LCFF support. And finally, we will be looking at our exploration of new measures for the college career indicator that are specifically designed with students with disabilities in mind. Okay. So for the summary of the 2019 dashboard results, I am going to get right onto our California dashboard homepage. And I don't know if you can all see this. Yes. Okay, so at the very top, you will see several tabs, and I am going to click the state summary. And that gives, first of all, just kind of a snapshot of all of the indicators and how the state did. And if we scroll down, we can look at each of the three areas: academic performance first, and the indicators for those statewide. And so we will see how English language arts performed statewide. We can see that we had improved performance for math maintained. And you basically can see the colors: green for ELA, orange for mathematics. The ELA we do not have, we just had status this year. The college career indicator. We can move through this entire, looking at chronic absenteeism.
And this is the whole student population, right, for the state? This is not.
This is statewide.
Right.
So let's see. I'm going back to. Here we go. Okay. So thank you. Sorry. Okay.
Let's see.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's just.
Okay, that's easier. Okay. And here is a snapshot. So for the performance gains, actually statewide, the state performed very well on all of the indicators, except for chronic absenteeism, where there was a negative trend. So we actually had an increase in the rate of chronic absenteeism. Okay. So if we go back to the dashboard and we want to focus on students, different student groups. What we can do is for any of the, at the bottom of any card, we can just do suspension, for example. There will be a report. I guess we can just put that this way. Okay, you can look at student group performance in two ways. Either you can look at each, all student groups by performance level, so you can look at students that got a red, the student groups that got an orange, etc. And if we want to focus on students with disabilities, we can see that for this particular indicator, we have a yellow. So if we want to now look at that indicator, that student group in detail, we go down to explore groups by performance level, just click the yellow, and it will bring you up to all of those groups. And we can see for students with disabilities what the exact percentage was for suspension and whether it improved or declined, and the number of students for that group. And you can do that for every single indicator. So again, going back to our, okay, thanks. So for this was for students with disabilities, here's again a snapshot. And ELA maintained, mathematics maintained. We have an orange for those two indicators, college career indicator, an orange, chronic absenteeism, an orange. Again, like the state, there was an increase. The graduation rate declined, and that's an orange. And then, as we saw before, the suspension rate, we have a yellow. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So before, any questions before we look at the LCFF results? Yes.
The decline in the graduation rate, what could you say what contributed to that?
That's one of the why questions. So that would be something that we could look into further as a state as to the why. We could make some hypotheses, like whether or not that had to do with students who received certificates of completion that didn't count, students who took longer than the allowable cohort year to be counted for graduation. There's a number of pieces that would be more of a deep dive study on that.
And that was a decline for all students, or that just?
That was for students with disabilities, right? Yeah.
Statewide, oh, right. Statewide, it was, I believe,
it increased statewide, didn't it?
Increased,
Yeah.
but-
It just went down for students with disabilities, but went up for other overall students.
So if we're looking at more kids took advantage of the certificate of completion, those kinds of things, that could contribute to.
Well, I think that it's a question that we could look into further for sure if you're interested. But I think what you'll see is to that particular question about diploma options for students with disabilities, there is a piece in the governor's trailer bill language about a work group to really dig into that and what we're looking at in terms of alternate pathways to high school diplomas for students with disabilities and the alt diploma as well.
So LCFF support. So as you may remember, there are 3 different ways of becoming eligible for LCFF support. One is through local indicator data only. So an LEA did not meet for 2 or more years a local indicator in at least 2 priority areas. Then there is, you can also become eligible through state indicator data, where one student group meets the criteria in at least 2 priority areas. And generally, that means receiving a red for a state indicator. Or there's a combination. You can have one student group that meets the criteria in one priority area, and then you have an LEA meeting the criteria on one local indicator. So based on 2019 data, we have 333 LEAs, districts and county offices of ed, that are eligible for differentiated assistance in 2019-20. And all but 2 of these LEAs were identified based on student group performance, so the state indicator data. The 3 student groups that are in greatest need continue to be the same: students with disabilities. So 187 districts and county offices were eligible based on this students group performance. Foster youth, we have 101, and homeless, 98 districts and county offices. The good news is that there was improved student performance for each of these groups. So between 2018 and 19, 56 fewer LEAs were identified based on the performance of students with disabilities.
Can we pause you for just 1 second and ask a question? Do you mind if we ask while we go?
Sure.
Okay, Gina?
Thank you so much. I just have a question. If you could go back to the previous slide. I know that charter schools are in the dashboard now and wondered, or maybe one more slide, and wondered if they are included in your district number or.
No. So there is separate data for charter schools, and there are going to be some adjustments made, so we did not include that data.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Ivania?
Maybe we haven't got to this portion of the presentation, but what is differentiated assistance? What does that look like? I know how they qualify, but have we gotten to the part about what differentiated assistance is?
In this presentation, we're just going through the results. We're not going into the details on, what that constitutes. So
a different division provides all of the support, the technical support behind what differentiated assistance means.
A different division actually works with that piece of it, but I think we'll hear from Carla tomorrow, and that would be a good question to hold off for her if it doesn't get answered for you.
If I could, I'll just give the elevator version. And so, as I understand it, once LEAs are identified or found eligible for differentiated assistance, that LEA would work with their county office and receive technical assistance going through kind of a continuous improvement model where we're looking at the data, identifying root causes, and developing an action plan to respond to the data that could be integrated into the LCAP and initiatives for the district in the next year to work towards improvement.
Okay, and so getting back to the improved performance. So we saw this improved performance for all three groups that are currently identified as those that are in greatest need. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Betty now, who will be talking about new measures that we're exploring for the college career indicator.
Okay, thank you, Sima. So in 1819, we collected new career measures for the College Career Indicator, also known as the CCI. And some of these measures were collected in CalPADS. Some of them were collected in CASEMIS. And of course, as you probably know, CASEMIS, which was the database system that collected information for students with disabilities, that has now been transitioned over to CalPADS. It no longer exists. However, at that time, I believe it was the last year in existence. And so some of these measures that are initially presented in this slide, such as pre-apprenticeship, state or federal job programs, which is just limited to DAS schools or our alternative schools, workforce readiness certificate, food handler certification, which is also limited to alternative schools. It may actually only be limited to juvenile court schools. We will still have to work with our stakeholder groups to make that determination if it's just going to be for juvenile court or if it'll be relevant for all of our alternative schools. But those four measures were collected in CalPADS. Now, the last two measures seen on this slide were collected through CASEMIS because they were relevant for just those students who had an IEP. And these measures are work-based learning measures, and so these are work-based learning experiences that a student can receive through the Workability Program or those services that students can receive through the Department of Rehabilitation. Now, one of the key components or data components that we wanted to collect for these two measures was the number of service hours that a student received. And so that we thought could help us determine whether or not a student was prepared or approaching prepared or not prepared for a career, as we make that criteria, develop that criteria for the college and career indicator. And so for instance, and I'm not familiar with these programs, but for instance, let's say if a student who received 200 hours of work-based learning services would be better prepared to go into the workforce compared to a student that may have received only 50 hours of work-based learning services. Because the collection of those number of hours was voluntary, unfortunately, we did not receive any data from districts in regards to this. However, just recently, we found out from a county office who informed us that she spent a lot of time and efforts gathering these data for all of her students. And then at the very end, she realized just as she was about to report these data into her local student information system, there was nowhere for her to report the data. And so we're assuming that if this occurred for one county office, this may have been a roadblock for other county offices, or other LEAs, I should say, as well. Another issue that was raised to us by LEAs is that work-based learning services were being offered by county offices of education as well as districts. So it's not just occurring through workability, and it's not just occurring through the Department of Rehabilitation. And so we were limiting, and giving, LEAs and schools credit for all the services that these students would receive. And so based on that, we are, for this year, for 1920, we're thinking about renaming and kind of revamping a little bit the current measure. So don't call it workability, don't call it Department of Rehabilitation, but call it classroom-based learning experiences for one measure, and then for the other measure, call it work-based learning experiences. And so for now, and I don't know if Shiloh's still here, okay. We're very fortunate to have a great partnership with Shiloh, but Shiloh and her team are going to be looking at the workability data so that we can actually start looking to see what would count for prepared, what would count for approaching prepared, and then not prepared, so that we have some sort of sense as we move forward with this and make recommendations to the state board about what our criteria should be. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, so I just wanted just to kind of touch base on, we're working right now with some of the folks in our transition areas. So Joanna Delegata from the Ventura County, who's worked really passionately on the workability work groups, has been providing us a lot of input about how districts collect this data. One of the most important things we wanted to do is it's sort of a push and pull. We wanted to provide a place where districts could send us information about students who were becoming prepared, students with disabilities who were becoming prepared through work-based experiences or classroom-based exploration, career exploration. But we didn't want it just to be sort of a black hole, right? We don't want to just, like, if you have 1 hour of work experience, that's not approaching prepared. And so that's really the challenge that I think we're focused with right now. So we're going to really tighten up the definition around our 2 indicators. They are yes/no indicators. They look at a student's experience over 4 years and whether or not they've had sufficient experience. And so we will have a new set of definitions that will be collected for this 1920 year. We're going to set, we're finishing them up. We're going to get some more stakeholder feedback. Then we'll begin to make those changes within the CalPADS definitions. And then we'll train on them pretty extensively in March and April so folks can input that data. So we're hoping that the data will be better because the definitions will be more clear for the upcoming dashboard. But this is still, we're still kind of trying to figure out. We don't want to put a huge onus on districts to have to collect a whole new set of data. We want them to be able to look at students and see, do we feel like this student is prepared for college and career, independent living career? And so that is going to be something we're looking at.
Thank you. Yeah. So definitely, as Shiloh was mentioning, this is still, we are still in the process of working on this. We just wanted to give you an update as to where we were with those 2 measures, now that we're changing the 2 measures. And definitely, Cindy and Jenny wanted you to know that once, we work with Shiloh and we look at the data and we have some potential recommendations, we'll be bringing all of this back to you so that you can take a look and then we can get your feedback on these 2 measures. And then, of course, we'll also take it out to our other stakeholder groups as well. So hopefully this was good information for you to have on where we are with these 2 measures for the college and career indicator. If there are any questions.
So I'm just super excited. So yeah, that just made my whole world better. So thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
That's very nice.
Okay. Thank you.
Exciting.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments before you go? Any public comments? Our own Barbara, who needs no introduction?
It is really hard to. Whoa. Now, you knew I'd come up for this one, Shiloh, even though I'm not on. I am fine with changing terminology because not everybody has workability, and workability really does so much more than classroom can possibly do. So I just want to make the comment that it's super important to make sure that we're not commingling things that really aren't the same. And that's all I wanted to say. But besides which, I've been sitting here 2.5 hours and didn't open my mouth. I know, it's tough.
It was like cold turkey, right, Barbara? It's too much. I did have one question. In terms of the voluntary aspect of the workability, is that going, I mean, that's such a critical data point. Do you think there's ever going to be a point when that's not voluntary and that we actually get more concrete data?
No, I mean, given the fact that CASEMIS is now transitioned over to CalPADS, right, and then CalPADS definitely is something that's enforced, within all schools and districts to report for each student. Personally, I would think that we would definitely see, a lot more information on these students, and we would actually get the data that we would need. Of course, we're trying to do this for the 1920 school year, so we have like a short-term solution to this. And then I know that we will be working,
So one thing that we had also considered, not for 1920, but potentially for 2021 and beyond, is to add courses to the course assignments that would sort of identify students who are enrolled in courses that do this. And then we could use that to sort of measure that. But in terms of the voluntary hours, so one of the things that is that when we collect data on IEPs, we collect data from an IEP that says these are the services that will be provided. And then we allowed LEAs for each student to provide for transition services on a voluntary basis how many hours that student did receive. I think, and it was voluntary, you could leave it blank, you didn't have to do it. There were some concerns in the field about, is this going to be punitive? So there was that part of it. But I think the other side of it was that a lot of IEP systems weren't necessarily prepared to do that kind of collection because their service tracker exists in sort of a separate element away from the data that's submitted to the state. So I think working with our vendors to help sort of tighten some of that pieces up, helping to work with the folks in workability, because oftentimes when we go to districts, the workability folks sometimes don't always work with the data folks and they're not always on the same page. Having that piece of it, but also if we can help to, if we can add courses into the course record for CalPADS where a student is enrolled in a course that does very specific things like work experience or classroom-based experience kind of stuff, because these students are all enrolled in school. So we should have courses that kind of reflect what they're actually doing. I think that would potentially be a better place to address your concern.
I think I'm in elementary. I've always been in elementary, short time in middle school, but my relationships with families that I formed over the years, it often saddens me when they come back to me and say, when we were working with you, we had a sense of what comes next. And I think Barbara would always speak to that, and those people that have gone through it as families. I think it is a really important transitional point, and I don't work in that area of things, but it seems like it shouldn't be something voluntary. We need to collect some strong data on how students are experiencing that transition away from school if we can. That's great. Well, you did a very nice job coming in, and I feel like it wasn't so bad, like to be able to hear it's been a good day. And when we made Michelle's happy, we turned her whole life around. So exciting. Any public comments on this? Barbara did it. Anyone else? No? Okay. We are now right on time for lunch. I'm so impressed with us. I do want to encourage everybody, do not be late because we have some celebration to attend to when we get back at 1:30 to recognize our dear Barbara and Matt too. So enjoy your lunch. We'll see you back at 1:30. All right, thank you, commissioners. I hope you all had a amazing lunch. It's a beautiful day in Sacramento. For those of you that have not looked at the weather report, it's absolutely perfect. So it's a nice time to go for a walk or take lunch or whatever, just to refuel. We had a big, busy morning and a lot to consider for the afternoon. We excused my partner in crime, David, as he was not feeling too well. So we will hope that he drinks some tea and starts feeling better soon. Before we get started, we set aside this time to have some celebration of some people that have meant an awful lot to this commission. And before I speak to them specifically, I want to talk a little bit about just the nature of how this commission's run. We're all appointed by our own bodies, and when our terms are up, there has been my experience that you can be sitting beside someone for quite some time, and then you come to the next meeting and they're just not there. And so there's been several people that, thank goodness for Facebook, because I feel like I can keep in touch with Fada and what she's doing, and some people that I knew only from this commission, but it's been kind of delightful getting to watch their lives and what they're up to. That being said, we've tried to turn that around a little bit and be able to anticipate when people are terming out or when they might be reappointed, and try to carve out some time to show our appreciation for the work that they've done for this commission. So I did reach out to Mildred. Mildred was not able to be here today. I enjoyed so much working with Mildred over the years in the small groups that we talked about different issues with her. She has tireless energy working with mental health issues. She's so smart and capable and funny. And I had several lunches with her over the years and really enjoyed our time together. And I'm sorry she wasn't able to be here today so we could honor and thank her for her years of service. Yes, we all should have had a green juice in her honor, or the soup. She loved that soup from around the corner. So we certainly thank her. And also Nikki Sandoval was not able to be here. She was our liaison to the State Board of Education, and she was just here at every single meeting, I think. Always here, always attentive, and having something good to offer and keep us informed about what's going on at the State Board. But we are very fortunate to have two very special people that have worked on the commission. I'm going to start with Matt, I think. Matt, you took over from, in my memory, you took over from Venetia, and just really helped us out. You were always kept us on time and cheerful, and I appreciated your text messages at times when things were going long or short or stall a little, or, you know, all those directives that you could give. So you've just been really helpful to this group in preparing for meetings and making sure that we were adhering to all the things we were supposed to adhere to, and assisting the work that we do, and being that go-between person between those of us that just land in Sacramento occasionally for these meetings and those of us that are working for the department and the division every day. And so we hear that you're going on to some exciting things. Do you want to share with everybody what your next steps are?
So yeah, Friday's my last day here at the department, and I will be moving on to the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, where I'll be working as a policy analyst.
And tell me what that work will look like for you. Tell me what you'll be doing.
Mainly, policy, you know, is kind of one of those words that can mean a lot. Is this not on? Oh, is it good? Okay. Yeah. It's one of can, you know, mean a lot of different things. Mainly, it'll be focusing on the legislative process and, you know, advocacy rather than advisory like we worked on here. And so it'll be working with the Capitol, working with staffers there to ensure that the policy focus of the State Council is ingrained into the legislative or the legislation that's, you know, signed into law.
And in this building will you be working, or a different building?
No, I will be working out in, well, for those out-of-towners, it's Natomas, which is north of here. Yeah.
Well, and my personal closing statement was going to be, I'm going to miss your bow ties, and you didn't wear a bow tie today. So now you've messed me up.
You still miss them.
That's right. I always enjoyed seeing what kind of bow tie you're going to wear. Well, I know I don't want to be the only one speaking on behalf of thanking Matt. Anyone else have a good Matt story or thank you or appreciation or anything for him? Gina?
Well, Matt, first of all, I love the new look. You look great. I like that. Well deserved. So I just want to say thank you. So for those of you that are new or for those of you that have been sitting in the audience, Matt has the best facial expressions anywhere. So it was always, as I was sitting in this chair, sometimes it got complicated for me to manage, you know, as people are sending messages or someone would like to say something. There's a lot going on. It's kind of like being in a classroom. And I could always tell from Matt's facial expressions if the overall, you know, beat of the room was positive or not, because he was very clear about that. And so that was very helpful to me. And then on a more serious note, just your ability to help this commission stay focused and organized and structured. You kept it alive. So I just want to thank you for your work. Of course.
I actually think those facial expressions at times got me in trouble. So I tried my hardest to not do that, but I'm an expressive person, unfortunately.
I have invited Matt to my next poker game, so that since he can't seem to hide those facial expressions.
Well, Matt, we have a card for you and a little something to hopefully get you into the movie theaters and have a little relaxation time, maybe, you know, before you start your new job, just an appreciation for all the work that you've given the commission. We really appreciate it. And I know you and I talked about knitting, and I didn't bring up anything. I was going to teach you how to do that, and I didn't bring anything up with me this time, but we're going to catch up with that another time.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you all. It was a blast getting to work with all of you. Really was.
Thank you. And now I get to say a few words about Barbara. I was thinking, Barbara, come on up. Come on, take the podium. So I was thinking a little bit about Barbara, and, you know, she's just the heart and soul of this group in so many ways. And I really think that she's not just the heart and soul of this group, but she's the heart and soul of many groups. That's really become very clear to me. No one's ever been hungry if Barbara's around. She always made sure that there was snacks that you arrived to, or no one's ever been at a loss for how am I going to get to the airport. She always made sure everyone was covered. I almost before lunch asked if you would become a new position of like honorary ambassador commissioner and take our new commissioners to lunch, because that was always the role that you would do. You always looked after our student commissioners. I mean, you just are the most nurturing soul. And the things I've learned from you are so much, you know, having been someone in elementary, to hear your experiences of how you worked with your students over the years to prepare them for life and all of the experiences that they would need to navigate was impressive, and really expanded my understanding of family life and student life to adult life. And I really treasure all the things you've shared with me. I love the way you've taken care of all of us at one time or another. Every single one of us would have a Barbara story, including when Betty just forgot to book herself a hotel room, and then you just pulled her into yours. And there were some good stories around being Betty's roommate that we will keep private. I love that you've always kept an eye on all of the students that other people might have not pulled out to be front and center. And you just always made sure that those students were front and center in all of our thinking. And you just always fought for every consideration that they deserved and every amount of love and support that we could provide them. I get the sense that your students are your extended family, because I've been at the airport with you before where you've gotten messages from them as they're adults and needing to figure something out. I know you live down near me and doing great work now. I think you've set the bar really high for every school board member, because I'm sure that there has never been one that has attended so many of your local school district events and plays and sporting events and all that. We couldn't thank you enough for what you have given this group, and I consider you a friend, and it's a pleasure to know you and have you part of my life and people that I've met through this group, and I just thank you very much. And I'm going to open it up so I'm not the only one talking.
Oh no, Gina.
So I think, first of all, Barbara, as I was thinking about you, and I love you, and I was thinking about sitting up here together for so many years, and one of the things Barbara and I agreed on early on was, even if we had a disagreement, we are the leaders, right? So we would lead together. So if only I had kept all those Post-its back and forth as we were discussing our differences, but projecting a unified front. That would have been very fun to have. But Barbara, I can't even describe what you have taught me about leading and about being passionate for kids and about being brave. You might be one of the bravest people I have encountered when it comes to difficult conversations and making sure that the interests of kids are at the forefront. And Saddleback is so incredibly fortunate to have you as a board member. I know that you will stay connected to this commission. And, before we both were appointed, some people know we sat in the audience together. And I can imagine there will be a day where we'll sit in the audience together again and write Post-its and make public comment together. So I just want to thank you for your leadership and your friendship, and look forward to more opportunities to work together.
So now is this on? Yes. I'd like to read what my son wrote this morning. Mom, please enjoy today. And don't view it as your last time. View it as your victory lap, as you have spent the past many years as a champion for students. You have always known what is important, and you have always fought for what is right. As you leave your meeting today, remember that you have done everything you can. Love you lots. So that made me feel real good. And now I'll read a funny poem, because I figured if I ended with the happy, it would be okay. It is with a heavy heart that I say goodbye. And if you think I won't miss you, that's a lie. For the years of testing and not being happy, and then we got answers, and I felt happy. From unanimous decisions and being marked down to the death of Lester brought us quite down. From do not use acronyms, which I stated all the time. From me, now that no one says it, I'm sure it's quite a glee. I made a lot of friends and brought snacks for all. I loved being vice chair for years. It was a ball. Thank you to everyone for helping me learn, and now it's time for another's turn. I love you all.
I can't let you leave, Barbara, without saying something. So I'll keep it short and sweet, because your son basically said it all. And on behalf of our state superintendent of public instruction and the 800,000 students with disabilities in California,
thank you.
Thank you.
And this is really tough if you didn't know, but my mother died 3 weeks ago. So it's like a couple of finalities at one time. So.
Okay, it's hard to bring presents wrapped and make them look so nice, but I want you to open this because there's a purpose for what this little gift is.
Okay, thank you so much. Should.
Show everyone,
Do you think I'm getting that old? Well, thank you.
Handy.
Well, it will come in handy, I'm
It's
sure.
kind of handy. But we
No
promise
spring
to do our very best to keep a close eye on all the things that are
And it was
important.
very nice of you to do this. I really appreciate it. And as you know, I started when Kristen was chair. So this is a long time. I'm figuring it's about 10 or 11 years. And so that's a long time. So, but thank you. I appreciate everything. I appreciated all the learning. Christine and Dawn, you're going to love it. It is just, and all I can say to you, there were things when you were seniors in high school, what was it, when you passed it down or something? Always say what you feel, because it's really important for people to hear that, because you may have something that nobody else thought about, and that makes everybody else think. So, and with having a parent's point of view, that also is really good. So, thank you. I love you all.
Well, we have a cake for you.
Okay.
So, I think it's on the back table. We can take a couple minutes if anybody wants a piece of cake. We can do that before we move on to our next item. Department of Finance. So, anyone that would like a grab of cake, public included, please come eat some cake and we'll celebrate Barbara and Matt.
I'm going to bring it up to you. Mom is mom. There's nothing you can do. Did she bring you silverware? I did. Boy, you guys have no confidence. No, I said, how could you leave without giving me a hug? You want some cake?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. I'll text you.
All right. Well, while we're serving cake, I don't think anyone would mind if we set up our next agenda item. Thank you. We are fortunate enough to have an update from the Department of Finance. We're going to be able to hear from the governor's 2021 proposed state budget, including what's happening for special education funding. So I would like to welcome, who's presenting today? Lisa Mierzinski. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Okay, excellent.
Is this on?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Michelle Valdivia is not able to join us today, so you're stuck with me. So I just want to give you a quick overview. I normally just kind of give you an update on what's going on with Proposition 98 since special education is funded within, and also to give you a little insight on how we do determine the values of what's proposed, the amounts in the governor's budget. And then we'll get into the details I know that everyone's waiting for on the special education changes that are included. So again, Proposition 98 is continuing to grow. It's mostly due to changes in increases in revenues that were unanticipated, and also because we're in a test 1 year, increases in property tax are also adding to this value. And as a result, oh, that's odd. Obviously, I didn't look at this before I put it together. So again, this shows the local control funding formula, and I'm showing you that because, as you can see, the local control funding formula is now at $63.9 billion. That's the estimate. So it's quite a significant growth. And again, I point that out because in the past, in the prior administration, this funding formula was the priority. until full implementation, this was going to be any new massive amount of Proposition 98 dollars was going to focus on getting this fully implemented. And the thought behind that wasn't that special education wasn't getting funding. The thought behind that is really that the local control funding formula is for all students, including special education students. So now that that's fully implemented, now the thought is on this new administration, the governor has an interest in special education and now looking at that funding formula. So again, I'm just to show you quickly how the priorities in the budget were. There's a COLA of 2.9%, which we understand is a little bit lower than what people had actually budgeted for. So we've heard some concerns in that area. But the other major proposal or spending proposal in this governor's plan is for special education. It's a $645 million increase to the base formula, a new formula, and then $250 million for a one-time funding. And again, I'm going to explain that a little bit more because it is ongoing funding. We're just proposing it for a one-time purpose. Everything else in the governor's budget outside of nutrition and a few smaller proposals are one-time. And so special education and the COLA are really the largest ongoing proposed spending in the plan. And this is because we again are a little nervous with some of the indicators we're seeing, and we wanted to build in some room. So if things happen, it's a lot easier and it makes more sense. People are not budgeting or planning their budgets around some of the one-time proposals, but we know the ongoings are looked at when school districts are budgeting. So we will have a more May revision. Usually around April we get our final revenues, and then we will have a final guarantee, and we'll be able to cement some of these proposals more. So I'm sure you recall last year in the budget there was $645 million, and again it was ongoing funding, but for one-time purposes. But that money was contingent upon coming up with another plan for special education. So over the summer and the fall, a group of us, including the Department of Education, the governor's office, and members of the legislature, we've started reaching out to districts, SELPAs, county offices of education, to kind of get a feeling of what's going on out there, what's working, how are services being delivered, what are your biggest concerns in special education, and really just to open up the conversation. We went through a couple advocates to help us set up these meetings, but for the most part, we tried to reach out on our own. So that we were hearing from people that we don't normally hear from in Sacramento. Our goal is we hear all the time what the larger school districts, their issues are, and we will continue to listen to those. But we needed to understand what some of the smaller ones, the unrepresented ones, were having issues with. These conversations are going to continue because it takes a long time and we haven't gotten to that. But we basically took the state and we broke it into regions, and throughout those regions we tried to make sure that we were peppering and talking to people throughout. There were large districts, smaller districts, multi-district SELPAs, single district SELPAs, county offices. So we really tried to be thoughtful in how we were getting the information. And we learned a lot, and a lot of what we learned is that there's so much more we need to know before we make some final decisions, which you probably already knew that without me going across the state to figure that out. But so in the governor's budget, the language that came out a couple weeks ago, I believe. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but there's the new funding formula is not in that language. We're working on it. We actually have it done. It's going through the approval process, and you should see it within the next week. And in that language, you will see the formula, and what we're planning to do, as long as we get the approval, is we're going to show a rate. So there won't be any questions. Everyone will see the new formula. They will see the new rate at which this new formula is starting, and then kind of some thoughts on how that will roll forward. But that is just the base rate. All of the other things that we're looking at, all of the add-ons, the categoricals, right now in language, what you will see is we kind of froze them in place. They will receive a COLA, but we really wanted to kind of lock down all the categoricals so that we kind of figure out the hold harmless as we move forward, but also just to kind of say we need a larger conversation. So in the meantime, let's just leave everything as is and start those conversations. So we really view this as a multi-phase discussion over the next 2 to 3 years. So the other piece is the $250 million. Again, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I've heard a lot of concerns on that, but I'll share those with you. And so included in the language is a governance and accountability study. And what I really would like to emphasize, first of all, I want you all to know these are proposals, and there's still conversations going on with the legislature and the governor's office and us, and then a lot of folks. We're hearing from a lot of people on what they would like to recommend. But the governance and accountability studies, and again, this is what I would like to make sure everyone understands, is not a study of SELPAs. I know that happened in the past, and that did not get received well. But what we have found as we go out is that there are some SELPAs doing amazing work, and they're working really well. We found that there's some regions that maybe not for the SELPAs problem, but because of the geographic concerns, that it's not, students are not receiving proper services. So through this administration, the idea is equity. Where no matter where you live as a student in California, you should have access to the same high quality services and delivery, regardless of who or how you're. So the idea is really not to fix SELPAs, because we don't think that SELPAs are broken. We feel that some are working really well. But it really is, what can the state do to make sure that students have access to equitable services? And how do we get there? And so that's what this conversation is about. SELPAs are going to be part of the conversation because that's our current governance structure. But beyond that, it's really, I just want to make sure everyone understands this is not the same conversation we were having a few years ago. And you guys, please feel free to stop me if you have any questions. It's easier than for me to just keep talking. So there's a couple work groups that you'll see in language. One is really brought to us by the department, the concern that the IEP templates being so different, it makes it difficult for students to transfer, and it also makes it difficult for the Department of Education to kind of review IEPs. So it's a work group. They're going to look at what a statewide template could look like, and then from there we'll decide in the next budget or so what we need to do as a state to make sure, or maybe have everyone access to a simpler IEP template, or at least a uniform one. And the other one is looking at alternative pathways to a diploma, which has also been brought to our attention as a problem and some concern. So again, this is just a work group to kind of look at it and make recommendations on what at the state level we should do to help in this area. What you're going to see, I'm going to go back one more, sorry. And I have a list a little bit later, but you're going to see a large investment in workforce development and recruitment in high needs areas. I have a slide later, so I'll give you a little more on that. There is $4 million for dyslexia. Again, this is a very important to the governor, dyslexia research. So we know the Department of Education put together some guidelines and for dyslexia. What this is going to do is kind of build upon those, and then also get what is going on in the state, put all these resources together, and then convene a group of people to share out those, build professional development in this area. This language is very broad the way we wrote it so far, so if you have ideas or anything that you would like to suggest, we welcome those in this area as well. So all of the other formula, the funding, I believe, I'm trying to think of the amount, but for instance, the mental health funding, out-of-home care, all of those are the ones that are frozen. Those will be considered and then brought into the final formula, and probably we're thinking about 2 years. We should, the next two governors' budgets or budgets from now, we should have some proposal on those. And then in language, I'm not sure if you noticed this or not, but we provided flexibility in the ERMS funding. Another thing we learned as we were out talking to school districts was that a lot of the mental health funding goes untouched or unspent, and they're getting creative. And some of them we thought were wonderful ways that they were spending the money. So this really just takes the educationally related piece off, the IEP piece, and allows it to be spent on mental health services a little more broadly. We have gotten so far a lot of great feedback on that, and school districts that we've heard so far. We have heard from some, I think it's that they are concerned. So we've asked them to send in their concerns on the language very specifically, and so we'll obviously take a look at that when we move towards spring. So again, if you have any concerns or questions, please let us know. I think this is just getting into the final phases. It's really the base funding is the initial, and everything else is going to be considered and worked towards. So anything It's a long list, which that's why we don't have it on here. So the $645 million ongoing Proposition 98 general fund, this is going to be calculated. This is what's different from the 602. So we're going to repeal the 602. And if any of you have looked at the language of the 602, you understand why it's easier to repeal it and start over. So it's not that we disagree with what the 602 is going, but the language is just a mess. So this is really starting over. It's going to be a more simple formula where it's just a base formula based on a 3-year rolling average calculation of the ADA instead of the one that's in place now. And everyone will start at a much higher rate. And again, you should have that rate within about a week or so. You should see that rate. SELPAs will be held harmless, and we have worked out the held harmless that you will see. It's also a little, as soon as we get the approval, I can tell you, but it's likely to be a hold harmless at your SELPA rate. And again, categoricals will remain unchanged. Did you have any questions on that, on the formula? Okay, good. It's pretty simple. The $250 million is similar to last year. We'll go out like last year based on school districts serving students 3 to 5 with IEPs. The funding will go out. Now, the difference between this funding and last year the funding was unrestricted. This funding this year, right now, the way the language reads, it will be restricted for new or expanded services. We've heard a lot of concerns on this from districts. And so, again, we're considering those concerns, and we'll, as we move towards May, we'll look at those. So please, you're welcome to continue forwarding your concerns. Absolutely.
Just an overall statement, I think that we're, as a SELPA director, as a special educator, and as a parent, I was really pleased to see this budget and the emphasis on special education, and I think that's all fabulous. I am concerned about the preschool dollars. We were concerned last year when we got them, just in terms of one-time money and what do you do with one-time money in a school district, and business people are very hesitant to make any long-term commitments on one-time money. And I think that, you know, the questions that we have thought of this year in terms of this is for expanding supports or services, we are already obligated to provide, you know, the free and appropriate public education. So we are already meeting their needs, and we're using, you know, district general fund dollars to meet those needs. So to say this money has to be spent on, you know, expanding services, it goes beyond the scope of what the IEP services are. So that would be something that that I would be concerned about as a district person, saying I don't still know what this means in terms of what types of services we're supposed to be looking at. Again, one-time money. It's just that's what's really hard. Money is always good, but just understanding those parameters it kind of locks us in, and I'm not sure what we would do with it.
Thank you. And we've heard those concerns. The thought is behind this is really to be more early intervening services, not necessarily in an IEP. So it would be students that you think may possibly be special education at a point in date. It might be, you know, assessing that or some other. We need to come up with a list of what this means. But that's the thought behind this, is that the earlier we can get some sort of diagnosis or service to a student before they become an IEP student, then the likelihood of them not becoming that would be helpful. So we've heard the MOE issue, and again, if it's services not in an IEP, then it wouldn't be part of the MOE.
And just, you know, as a kind of consideration for you to think about, the bulk of the students that we get come in at age 3. They come in at their 3rd birthday. We're doing the assessment that they've been identified through other programs coming in. So there's not a large percentage of kids that are in our regular preschool programs that would benefit from early intervention and would preclude them from becoming special ed. So it's just, you know, a way of looking at it.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. A little bit on the one-time versus ongoing. So in Proposition 98, we've set this aside as ongoing funding. we have to set it aside as a one-time purpose because we're pretty much we're saving it. If we don't, then it could get into another ongoing program, and it would be hard to claw that back for special education next year. So yes, it's awkward, but it's intentional because we want to make sure that it's tagged as special education funding so that next year or the year after, it's available for us to roll into the new formula. So that's why it's one time. And yeah, and it is very odd sometimes when we do these, but that is the purpose behind that. And it's the same why we did the 645 last year as one time, because we knew we wanted to use it for the formula and we wanted it available in the guarantee. If you have better ideas on the one time, you can send me those as well. Another thing I just want to point out, one of the things that, several items that were brought up as we were out talking to school districts is full inclusion is very important to this administration, and also making sure that special education is not siloed, whether it's the funding or the students. That special education, the conversation is not my kid, your kid, it's one child. Very, very important. That's some of the things that we're going to be looking at in special education reform. How do we as a state make sure that that's happening? And that how as a state can we incent those behaviors? So again, it's going to be this long conversation on what does it look like now and how do we get to where we want it to look like? One of the things that we heard out there is that as they move to full inclusion, a lot of teachers are not prepared to teach that kind of classroom. So Linda Darling-Hammond, the state board president, it was very, very important to her, high quality teachers, and then building that teacher pipeline that are ready and prepared to teach the kind of classroom we want to see at the state. So that's why you're seeing such a large infusion for teacher prep and teacher development and kind of building the pipeline, retaining our teachers, and making sure that they're qualified to move our classrooms in the direction the state wants them to go. Again, there's probably going to be some movement on this large amount of one-time funds up in May, but right now this is kind of our thought. We were also hearing a lot out there that there's a shortage of the specialists, speech pathologists, psychologists, and what have you. So there's also some money in this to try to develop those professions at the state. I think that's it. So if you have, I just, again, want to point out that this is a proposal. We are not trying to rush this through in any way. We want this to be a very thoughtful conversation where all voices are heard. We also are working very closely with the legislature and the governor's office and anyone who wants to talk to us, because this is very important. It's been many years since we've been able to do anything in special education, so we want to make sure we get it right. So, any questions? My email's there. If you're interested, you have questions, concerns, or you'd like us to talk to a group, we really want to make sure.
Hi. I just have a comment. I'm thrilled to hear you say that inclusion is a priority. I'm a parent of a severely disabled child who goes to a charter school that is fully inclusive. She is in a general ed classroom 100% of the day and is thriving. And one of the most successful things I think they do well is co-teaching. It's not just a general ed teacher in the classroom with special education students plopped in there. The special ed teacher and the general ed teacher do planning and co-teaching together and are very integrated. And the other thing I was going to say is from a funding perspective, our school really also struggles because we have a higher population of disabled students. It's like around 30%, I think, of the population. And most of the disabled students in our population aren't in other areas of the funding LCFF. So that becomes a real challenge for us. So just some considerations I wanted to voice.
Thank you. And we actually, when we were out on our site, we saw some of the co-teaching models, and they were fabulous to see. I mean, you would walk in the classroom and you would not know which teacher was which or which students, and they were having a lot of success with that model out there. So. Oh, absolutely. Okay. Thank you. I was just mentioning to Gina yesterday that charters are on our list, but we have not been to a charter yet. So we would love to set up a site visit for that.
I think Christine and then Sarah.
I didn't mean to talk on my first meeting, but what I just wanted to say,
I never mean
I'm
to
so
talk.
out of my element right now. But thank you. I'm glad to see that there's so much emphasis and support for special ed in the budget, and that the governor has made it a priority, and it looks like it's really in the works. I just wanted to put in a plug on that last part. I think that the teacher pipeline is so crucial to everything working at every level, and I'm happy to see that there is an emphasis on that. And you mentioned that other areas that you were looking at besides teachers were the support staff. So, I would say speech pathologists, OTs, PTs, paras. And then I have to put in a plug for my daughter's deaf and hard of hearing program. People would be very unhappy if I wouldn't mention interpreters and support for the deaf and hard of hearing group, because they are even more in demand and harder to find. So I hope that's part of this group that we're hoping to try to get more funding for and support for and training.
I think that the way the language is written, I don't think it would exclude that. I don't think they're called out particularly, but it's a broad language.
Okay, thank you.
But I'll double check.
I just want to remind people that this is really kind of a culmination of the work that the Special Ed Task Force started several years ago when we were looking. Gina and I were both on the finance part of that committee, and we talked about kind of some of this disparity among how SELPAs were funded and several of these other things. So I think it's really exciting to see it kind of coming forward, and that this is a priority for Governor Newsom, and kind of excited about that. I think it also kind of ties back into some of the other stuff we talked about this morning, which is the role of SELPAs in terms of being these content leads and these improvement leads, and it kind of validates the work that they're doing, and it is exciting. I think that I was excited to hear you say kind of SELPAs aren't broken. There may be some things that we need to do, but I think that people have kind of that's kind of a misconception out there. So I'm excited to see how how this looks in the May revise. But it's very we feel very supported by the governor in terms of the emphasis that he's having on special education.
I work with the Sacramento County Office of Education. We were recipients of the classified manager teacher to grant program, and I want to just say that it is so helpful, and it is working in a way that we're addressing our need in our region, in the Sacramento County, to assist with the special ed teachers. Having special ed teachers in our schools. Our intern program has increased with a number of those classified employees who are interested in making sure that they become now teachers. It has just been very exciting. So I just wanted to kind of, and it is useful. It is a program that is really, we're benefiting by getting more teachers, special ed teachers, into our classrooms. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you. Keep putting the money there, because that teacher development is so important as we look at having the right teachers for our students. Thank you.
Sure. So I just want to back up on what Steve was saying. So getting the teachers there is so important, and then finding a way to retain those new teachers in a way that really supports them and doesn't overwhelm them. The BITSA process tends to overwhelm them right now. And then with the special education, there's just a lot of stressors that are hard to really fully understand until you're the person in the classroom, and the stressors are not generally related to the students. It's the legal process that surrounds it, and there's not a lot of education going in for those teachers or support. So recruitment is great, but the real key is retaining, because we need experienced special educators, and almost everybody I meet is green. They're lovely and they're energetic, but they don't have a lot behind them because we're losing a lot of our experienced people.
And I think a lot of where you're going to see some of those support, because we also heard teachers leave, and I forget the turnover, but a lot of it is that just they're burned out. So what the state's doing also through the local control funding formula, but also for special education, is building up the statewide system of support. And what that's supposed to be doing is really bringing supports and services down to those teachers at making it accessible so the school districts can come in and get teachers trained or have other people come in, experts, coaches come in and assist. So as that's building out, we're still kind of, it's in its infancy, but as that's building out, I think you'll start to see where, and it was quite upsetting when we were going out and asking smaller districts, do you know the local control funding formula? You do know anything about the statewide system of sport? Nothing. So you will see in the budget also some, a little bit more outreach and building up so that so everyone's aware of the state system of support, what's going on, and how it's going to start connecting to all these pieces. And hopefully it ends up with teachers feeling fully supported in the classroom. A lot of what, and this again is Linda Darling-Hammond and the State Board and the Department of Education, building up those Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 supports in our state system of support so that special education services are really those add-on to get the kids access to the Tier 1, 2, Tier 3, but all kids having access to those excellent supports at all levels. So it's a real shift in California, this movement, and it's been happening. A lot of it's going on right now, and hopefully we'll start seeing some of the benefits. Well, we already are. I think a lot of our achievement gaps are starting to close. So, and you'll also see in the budget some more focused on a couple of the more achievement gaps that are not closing, and so there's a couple large grants that are focusing on some areas that hopefully will work and then be available for everyone once we model those.
Thank you. We have 2 new commissioners, and truthfully, I think it's a good review for all of us. Could you give us a broad lens on what Department of Finance does and how they interact in the state government?
So funny. Everyone says, "What do you do?" So we probably have more hats than people recognize, but we develop. At the start of the whole budget process starts with the governor's budget. So my unit in the Department of Finance does the education budget for the governor. So we start with Proposition 98 formula, and then we determine all of the different proposals or starting points. And we work closely with the governor's office, obviously, in the State Board of Education as we're putting together that package. But we're also heavily involved in a lot of the process of the bills. Anything that has a fiscal cost usually runs through our shop where we analyze it and make recommendations on it. And then the whole process, so it starts with the governor's budget, and then we start, like right now, we're in the process of waiting for new factors, and we'll start towards the May revision. But in the meantime, we will be having hearings with the ledge staff, and we will be discussing all of the proposals as well as their proposals until it gets to the point where there's a negotiation for what the final budget looks like.
Thank you so much. Any public comments on this item? Sure.
Wanted to, if you could clarify, one of the last things you said earlier was about a couple of grants that were looking promising. Could you tell us more about?
Yes. There's $300 million included for the community schools partnership grant. And community schools are there's several going on in the state right now, but these are meant to go into some high poverty, low performing areas and focus on I guess wraparound services is what, but it's services that not only a student walks into a school and you're not only getting an education, but you're also getting all the other supports and services that you may need to access that education. And it's all there on site. So it's working with all of the different other county agencies to make sure that it's easy and accessible. In addition to extended learning time and other professional developments and getting high quality teachers in those areas. And community schools are kind of a model under ACSE. And it would just be, the $300 million would be to expand those community schools in our state. And then anything that's learned from them to allow them to be accessed through the state system of support. The other one is $300 million for opportunity grants. And these are definitely to be more targeted for high poverty schools. We're finding that high poverty schools there's the teacher quality generally is you need more teachers, higher quality teachers, and so again these grants will be targeted to, I want to say, 23 of our highest poverty, lowest performing school districts. And this a grant will be administered by the California Collaborative, and they are working on, again it's a proposal, so it would be requiring them to work on a plan on what this looks like.
Any public comments? No? Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a really great presentation with a lot of information. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, we're moving on to item 6, which is our legislative update. And we welcome Allison Smith to come and tell us everything that we need to know about current legislation. Hi, Allison.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I know you have a handout, and I don't know that I'm adding value by simply reading what's already in your handout, but I do want to point your attention to the bills that became law on January 1. Some of those bills, let's see, one of those bills will actually go into effect at the end of this fiscal year. But in particular, I want to point your attention to AB 1172. And this is a bill that was written in response to the tragedy that occurred at the Guiding Hand School in El Dorado Hills in November of 2018. And the special education staff wrote the initial drafts of the bill and continued to amend the bill as it moved through the legislative process. And this is a bill that makes substantive changes to the laws that affect non-public schools and agencies. And the intent of the bill is to give the California Department of Education more authority in reviewing and even revoking certification with schools. And it also gives more responsibility to local educational agencies that contract with non-public schools. And the full text of the bill is available at the legislative's intranet site. And it makes this 1172 made the biggest changes to this section of law that I've seen since Darrell Steinberg's assembly bill that came out, and I think it was 2004, maybe 2006. So this is a really important bill and a good one, I think, to familiarize yourselves with, especially if you're involved in an entity that is sending students to non-public schools and agencies. Assembly Bill 605 added section 56040.3 to Ed Code, and it pertains to the use of assistive technology devices. The new law makes LEAs, including charter schools, responsible for providing a student with disabilities who requires the use of an assistive technology device with continued access to the device or to a comparable device when the student, because of enrollment in another LEA, ceases to be enrolled in that LEA. And some of you may be familiar with some of the challenges that students who require assistive technology experience when they shift LEAs, when they graduate, and the students need to have continued use of these devices past that benchmark, and this bill allows that to take place, gives the LEA the authority to do that. AB 947 adds 2 new sections to Education Code, and it authorizes school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools to consider elements of the expanded core curriculum as the bill defines that when developing IEPs for students who are blind, have low vision, or are visually impaired. Of particular interest and importance, I think, is that if an orientation and mobility evaluation is needed for a student who is blind, has low vision, or is visually impaired, the new law would require that these evaluations be conducted by appropriately certified specialists and occur in familiar and unfamiliar environments, in varying light conditions, at home, in school, and community, and that the students receive appropriate and necessary related services. What was happening was that some districts were concerned about letting their students ride in cars that were being driven by orientation and mobility specialists. They were worried about the liability of leaving a child alone with an O&M specialist. And so the Association of Orientation and Mobility Specialists went ahead and wrote up this bill, and we hope that it gives them some added authority to do the work that they need to do with this group of students. Those are the 3 bills that affect special education law statute per se, and that's in the 56,000 series of Ed Code. And we also track, and last year I tracked, I think, about 45 bills. We have a very active legislature. And not all of those bills directly amend or add new statute and education code in the 56,000 series, but it's legislation that will affect our students or has a potential for affecting our students. So we keep an eye on those. And the first one is AB 34, and it amends education code by requiring each LEA to ensure that specified information on bullying and harassment prevention is readily accessible at a prominent location on the LEA's existing internet website. And as you know, our students are sometimes receiving disproportionate amounts of bullying. And so this is a little law that I think is important for parents to know about if you interact with parents. AB 189 amends the penal code by adding qualified autism service providers and others in that field as mandated reporters of child abuse or neglect. And this is the definition of a mandated reporter continues to expand, and last year it expanded to incorporate our students who have autism. We watch a lot of different statutes. We watch Business and Professions Code, we watch Government Code, we watch Welfare and Institutions Code, we watch Health and Safety Code, because laws pertaining to our students in one way or another appear there every year. AB 413 amends both Ed Code and Penal Code by deleting references to at risk and replacing that term with a term at promise. So we are no longer referring to students as being at risk. We are now legally required to refer to them as being at promise. AB 988 amends Ed Code by authorizing the Commission on Teacher Credentialing to allow applicants for an education specialist credential to demonstrate their area of concentration based on 2 years of experience in California while the candidates hold the preliminary credential. And clearly the intent of this new law is to try to bring in new teachers, even those that may not be fully credentialed. It expands the wiggle room for ensuring that we have the teachers that we need. AB 1354 amends Ed Code by requiring a county office of education as part of the joint transition planning policy to assign transition oversight responsibilities to existing county office personnel who will work with county probation department and relevant LEAs to ensure that specified transition activities are completed for student and to facilitate the transfer of complete and accurate education records. And I won't read any further into that, but again, the intent is that when we have students who have been involved with juvenile court school, sometimes they're in and out of the court school so fast, their records aren't keeping up with them. A judge won't know that it's a student with an IEP. The student does not receive the services that he or she should under the IEP while they're in the court school. And so this is an attempt to ensure that these students' records are keeping up with them, that the students are provided with the records they need when they move from one system to another, that their guardians are informed. We had looked at a bill a couple years ago that was introduced on the same topic. It didn't go very far into the legislative process, but we supported it because we know that this is necessary. And so one of the things that happens, and many of you may know this, but when a bill is proposed, it may create an unfunded state mandate. And that is sometimes the kiss of death. They end up dying in appropriations somewhere. And so a lot of bills will be sent out the first time. It creates an unfunded state mandate. The author brings them back in and looks for ways to rewrite the bills so that they can avoid incurring that unfunded state mandate, and I think this is one of those bills. Senate Bill 223 amends Ed Code by authorizing the governing board of a school district, a county office of education, or a charter school maintaining kindergarten or any of grades 1 to 12 inclusive to adopt at a regularly scheduled meeting of the governing board or body a policy that allows a parent or guardian of a student to possess and administer medicinal cannabis at a school site for the student who is qualified to receive it. This is a really interesting bill because if you're receiving federal funds from a federal government that does not recognize cannabis as being a medicinal, you are in danger of losing your federal funding. So this is a bill that allows school boards to allow a parent to come onto the campus to administer the medicinal marijuana, thus breaching a federal law. The reason that the bill was passed was because students lose time in the classroom when they have to leave the classroom and go out to the parking lot to see mom, who gives them the tincture, and then they have to walk back in again, and they've lost all that class time. So it's going to be interesting to see where this bill goes. SB 419 amends Ed Code by extending the permanent prohibition against suspending students enrolled in kindergarten through grade 3 for disruption or willful defiance to include students in grades 4 and 5. The prohibition is also being expanded to include students in grades 6 through 8 until July 1, 2025. And if you've been watching this issue, you know that the numbers of grades that are being protected from willful defiance has increased, and it's been a good thing for kids. There was some skepticism about it as a public policy when it was initially introduced, and we've found that it's a good thing, and so the prohibition against the use of willful defiance retaliation, I guess, has been expanded. And that's the one bill that goes into effect on July 1 of 2020. So this is a lot of stuff, a lot of words coming at you. Any questions? Are you all kind of up on this stuff? Do you watch this stuff on The Natural? Yeah.
Well, I feel like I need to reach out to Barbara because I can hardly see that far, but I think I haven't seen her close her mouth since the cannabis bill was mentioned. Yeah. Havania, did you have a comment?
What's the best way a layperson can monitor bills? I find myself trying to get on the site, but then I used to get notifications. Now I don't. So what's the best route to be able to monitor bills?
Right. So I don't know if you belong to any associations where they may be taking a cut of the tsunami of legislation that's introduced every year. Every year the legislature introduces about 2,000 bills. It's a lot to keep track of. What I do is I go to the legislature's website and I go to the bill information tab, and I don't enter any information other than the fact that I'm looking for bills for this year. I click on the tab that brings up all the bills. At this time of year, I'm scanning all of the bills, but we're at the second year of a 2-year cycle. So there's been about 2,000, actually it's about 1,800 assembly bills that were introduced in the first year of this 2-year cycle. So if you start looking at assembly bills from about 1,800 on, what you can do is track them. You can ask on the web page that you're looking at for the bill. You can click on the bill, and I just build it, and it is a little bit time consuming. But I look at every bill that's being introduced. Some of them will have titles like mental health, and then I have to click on it to see what codes we're changing, what population we're talking about. And then I just track it, and I just build my tracker from there. And I hit the little option that gives me notice anytime they do anything with the bill, because I want to see every tiny little thing they do. And so that way you will have an email that loves you every day. You will have a million emails coming through, but that way you don't miss anything. The other thing that's important to look for, Havania, toward the middle of the ledge session are all the gut and amends that happen. So someone introduces a bill, it's not going anywhere, they decide, hey kids, let's do a special ed bill. And so something that was about tax codes suddenly becomes about our kids. And so you have to keep an eye out for the gut and the mens as well. And that's what we do. Yeah. Yeah, one of many.
You made a comment about that now we're going to refer to students of promise versus at risk.
That is right.
And so could you define what a student of promise is and how are they defining that?
So the way the bill was written was it basically just said, anytime in statute we have a reference to a student at risk, we're now going to remove at risk and put in the words at promise. And so the bill does not define what constitutes a student who's at risk or at promise. It just makes a linguistic switch.
Whose thinking was that?
I'm going to plead the fifth.
Okay. I'm curious because all of our kids are at promise.
Right.
And my concern
I think
is
that was the point.
Yeah.
I think that was the point.
Yeah.
So it went through the full legislative process and was signed by the governor. So to answer your question, it went through a lot of committee hearings and Assembly and Senate and then to the governor's office. So that kids are not labeled at risk. It's cup half full.
Yeah. At risk. That's why that's going to be difficult in some ways. Are we now ignoring some of their areas that why they were at risk that we want to make sure that we're addressing?
Right.
I'm just.
That's a good question for the author of that bill. We would hate to try to say what we think that they were thinking through that.
Yeah. What I would recommend is if you look at Senate Bill 419, if you go to the Ledge internet site, you can not only pull up the text of the bill, but you can also watch the archived committee hearings that were held on the bill. You can read the legislative staff analysis on the bill. I particularly like to do that when I'm looking at a bill because, and you don't get the staff analysis right away. They have to have some committee meetings first. But I like to look at that because it tells you what the author is thinking. It tells you what legislation is in existence now. And it also tells you who the proponents for the bill were, who the opponents for the bill were. You get a lot of information. I probably told you something you already know, but yeah, a good reminder. The staff analyses are always very interesting.
Quick question, Allison.
Sure, yeah. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Allison. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How about yourself?
Good. On the bill that has to do with the communication and the transfer of records to the court for kids who are involved in that situation, I'm not sure what COE stands for.
County Office of Education.
Oh, okay. And then is the onus then on the County Office of Education to contact the LEA about the need? Because a lot of times I know that everybody's probably sharing this experience. You don't even know what's happened to the kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that it does say that the transition plan is supposed to be developed by the COE. Personally, because I'm kind of a belts and suspenders type, if I know I have a kid out there, I'm probably going to have a monthly call with the COE for an update, just so that there are no surprises, just so that I'm tracking my kiddos.
Yeah, if there's a person who you can call, that's even a step in the right direction. At this point, I haven't found that person, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's great. I mean, sometimes we'll go through probation officers, and some are more responsive than others, but.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I know. It's a big system with a lot of working parts.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ivania?
The bill AB 988, can you please give me more context on that one again? That's on the teacher credentialing 2 years.
So I'm not sure that I can because this is an area of law that I am not particularly expert in, and I always find anything having to do with the commission pretty prolix and complex. My recommendation would be to just take a look at the bill itself and see what you can learn. I'm sorry, that's not a very helpful response on my part. And I'm hesitant to throw my colleague Aaron Christensen under the bus, but he has been my go-to guy when I've had bills on the CTC and I've needed to understand their implications for our student population. So
I was just, my guess would be, are they saying that preliminary credential holders are required to hold that credential for 2 years now instead of 5?
It says that if you're an applicant for the education specialist credential, you can meet the requirements that you need to based on 2 years of experience in California at the same time that you're holding the preliminary credential. So there's a parallel process as opposed to a sequential one, which makes the sequential process is longer. So this way you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. That's my understanding, but you may want to follow that up a little bit.
Thank you, I will.
Yeah.
Christine?
Okay, again, I wasn't planning to talk today, but I live in Davis, so I just had to speak to AB 1172, and I didn't know Max Benson's family, but like everyone else in the community, our hearts were broken with what happened to him and his family, and I know that we all are hopeful that this change, this new law, will help to prevent any tragedy, even anything close to this. So I wanted to say that, and I'm glad that that the legislature and the governor went ahead and made changes. I wonder if you can explain just from a practical standpoint how it's different from what was in existence before, because I know that I noticed the one thing was the conducting on-site visits, and I don't know if that was required before. How exactly are districts different, or how is it different from the parent's perspective of what you're expecting to be done with when you send your kid to a school that your district sends you to?
You know what? We're actually planning on bringing you back a presentation on this in full so that you guys can get more of the details. I know this is an issue of interest, and so if you would like, we can give you more of a full accounting. We're also working out the details of how we monitor for all the things that are within this, so I hate to has to say something prematurely about exactly how it's rolling out. But
okay. I guess I just wanted to understand just generally then how does the statute compare to what was or was not in the statute before? So maybe not all the practicalities, but
right,
the requirements.
So the handout that you received outlines what's new in the bill,
okay,
and what's new in statute, and I can go through that if you want. The important thing to also know from a procedural perspective is that if you go to the LegInfo website, if you click on the tab that says today's law as amended, you will see what has been changed in the law versus what existed before then. And this bill made several changes to a very long series of laws. Our laws on non-public schools have just grown and grown and grown, and the sections are just ginormous. But the things that are outlined in your handout are the things that have been added.
So those are what are new.
Those are what's new.
Not just
That's right. Okay. Yeah. And then if you want some help navigating that website,
I've read it. I'll be on there.
Okay. Okay. All right. And anybody can call me at any time. I'm happy to. Yeah, I'm always happy to provide technical assistance too. But there are a lot of changes.
I'm glad that we're going there. So
yeah,
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Allison, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
It's very helpful. Look at that, Gina. Look at that, 2:45.
Summer.
Amazing.
We do have one public comment request from Kenya Martinez.
Okay, public comment.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kenya Martinez. I would like to thank my job for allowing me to come to this meeting today. I wanted to talk to you about AB 947. Actually, the last time I was at this meeting was when AB 947 was proposed, And since then, it's been passed. And I wanted to tell you as a parent how elated I am. I have a student who is visually impaired who wasn't allowed to go off campus to participate in O&M training. And now they're able to actually do things like cross the street by themselves. So I am elated this bill was passed. I just wanted to make sure that you heard my voice and that you actually saw a parent and how effective this bill has been for me and my family. Thank you.
Well, we're not supposed to comment on public comments, but I'm going to anyway because that was really great. Thank you for getting up here and saying that. That was nice. All right, commissioners, we have an after lunch break. So we'll take a few minutes and then meet back together, and we're going to be doing our work in our policy groups and ledge groups. All right, commissioners, thank you. We had a chance to stretch our legs a little bit. We're right on track. We've got a 3 o'clock start time for our next agenda item, item number 7, which is start on time, end on time, which is a chance for us to introduce some new subcommittee chairs that I'm very grateful for their support. I reached out to Sarah Jocham and asked if she would be interested in being subcommittee chairperson for our policy subcommittee. She was so interested, and Kimberly has been providing the leadership in that group, and she was prepared to continue, but she was also asking if someone else might be interested, and so Sarah stepped up to fill that role. And then David and I had been the subcommittee chairs of the Ledge Committee for I'm not sure how long, and we needed to pass that on, and Havania was able to step up and step into that role, so we appreciate that from you very much. This is when we split into 2 different groups to talk about planning and things of interest to both policy and legislative work that we provide advice on to different bodies. And we talked this morning in our operations and planning meeting about, we only have 45 minutes, so we tried to think of a particular focus. And I know part of the discussion will be around AB 1914 and also FEC proposals and needs that they have. And they've been a good partner to our community for a long time. And so we want to be able to talk through those things in our subcommittee groups. So what I would like to ask us to do, is there any other items that you might recommend that, keeping in mind we have a limited time frame, but we want to make sure we get your thoughts on what the 2 different groups should be reviewing or discussing. Do any commissioners have any input on that? Okay, excellent. So we're going to maybe break a little bit early so we can spend the time actually talking in the small group. So for our new commissioners, the way it works is traditionally the Ledge group has been working through that door and in kind of side conference room. And then the policy group usually meets here. The public is invited to attend either group, and you're invited to choose which you think you might be more interested in. So, and you can float between them or, sort of get a taste of both if you like. But we welcome all input into the discussions that we have in that group. When we're finished, we come back and our chairs will report out on things that were discussed in the time together. And then we just can discuss that as a whole group in the commission. So if there's, Aaron?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we do have policy set up in 1801 down the hall, but I can grab the materials and bring it back here if you would prefer. Just to, okay.
So why don't we go ahead and get started in those groups, because it always takes us a little bit to reassemble. And we will see you. The cameras are off for this part of it, right? And so you can tune back in and you'll hear at what time? At 3:15, at 4 o'clock. We should be able to report out on how the discussions went in those 2 groups. So policy in here and Ledge in the conference room just through that door. We have had a full and productive day. I'm so proud of everyone. I'm proud of our new commissioners who've spoke and contributed and added so much already, even in their very first meeting. Good for you. We are going to get to our last bit of work today in which we hear out what the committees talked about. So anybody like to go first? Sarah, Havania, you go ahead.
Okay, so our committee talked about two bills, and I'm going to share with you the background of both. So we spoke about AB 1914, and it is special education, inclusive education. And this bill is targeting or wanting to expand inclusive practices. So this bill increases the opportunity for all California students to meet their full academic and social potential by promoting and supporting the inclusion of students with disabilities in the general education classrooms. The bill expands successful strategies for promoting inclusion and addresses barriers which prevent students with disabilities from learning alongside their peers. Okay, so we would like to have this put on the agenda for April so we can discuss it as a body. My colleagues, would you like to share what we discussed about AB 1914, inclusive practices classroom?
I think one of the things that we shared was we wanted to have some kind of testimonies about how it is working, the impact that it's doing to our families and to our kids and all those kinds of things. Testimonial by our new commissioner there would be great in some ways to kind of share that before we, as we look at supporting it, that we have a rationale behind it.
I'll add. Thank you for leading the committee, Havania. And we also had Tanya Lieberman, the policy consultant from Assembly Education, come and talk about the bill. And what I love about it is that it's, I think, one of the first bills on inclusion that we've seen introduced, and really attempts to support the department's SIP project. And so we had some great discussion. Tanya brought a fact sheet about the bill. And so, like Havania and Stephen said, the committee was in support, but would like to put it on an agenda so that we could make sure we're not missing anything, give the public the opportunity to weigh in and give us information, and then make a recommendation at our next meeting.
Okay, that sounds great. David's not here, and he works to build the agenda, but I'll make sure that when we speak, he'll have that information. Any other comments on the Ledge Committee work?
We did also say that we would like to see inclusive practices happen as soon as possible, like in preschool, so we can make sure that all students have the opportunity to be included from preschool all the way to high school.
Okay. Sarah, you want to share about policy? So sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
Our second bill that we discussed was AB 2056, Special Education Programs, Family Empowerment Centers on Disabilities. And the summary on this bill: establish the Family Empowerment Centers in regions of the state that currently do not have a center, provide a one-time base grant increase for the operating FECs, which is the Family Empowerment Centers, and develop a uniform data system to improve coordination between California Department of Education and the FECs. And we discussed the need for families to have support throughout the state, not just sporadic. And yes, anybody else would like to chime in on that?
I think the piece is that we support the legislation. We'd like to see centers in the 32 regions. For all of them, there are presently 14. With that, we would like to have the commission say that, and we'd like to have an agenda and like to have the commission support that. as that we believe in this legislation and we'd like to support its passage.
April?
I think we also discussed that this could be an avenue for a middle person, a middle organization to help so that it doesn't lead more individuals to go to due process. There's, for some people, there is a trust issue with the SELPAs, and parents need a little bit more guidance, and that middle organization could help to eliminate some of those costs as well.
Dawn?
Wanted to add, I actually have experience with our local family resource center and found it really critical and helpful, particularly during the transition of my child from preschool to elementary school, which is a pretty scary time, and you're not really sure who to talk to, and you have a lot of questions, and they provided trainings and guidance and support in a very friendly third party kind of way, where they broke down the process and also made connections to other resources and just made that process so much easier.
One last piece. Our committee did talk about how we did have a presentation from the FECs before, and perhaps we should have them come out again to share with us exactly the value that they do have on the community, and how the other areas, the other 32 regions would need to have that support too.
Okay, Sarah?
Well, the policy committee had several guests in attendance, and were very helpful as we were going through some of our information. And one of the things we started with was really looking at the college and career indicator that we spoke about this morning. Both, I think it was part of Shiloh's presentation and then part of the assessment presentation, and really looking at that indicator and kind of echoing some of the thoughts that it doesn't really reflect what students who have disabilities can do. And we had representatives from the Special Education Administrators of County Offices and SACSE to really talk about what the modified indicators could possibly look like, or to say there is really a need to have a modified indicator for that 1% group of students. And we talked about, if I look at this and say, if the kids that are in special education in my district could do all of these indicators to pass this college and career indicator, they would not be in special education. So we know that we kind of looked at it as maybe there's accommodations for that larger group of students who have special needs, and then maybe a modification of this indicator for the students who are in that alternate assessment, that 1% of students, to really demonstrate that they're part of this and that they're not, we don't care, they're always going to be in the red, it doesn't matter, but to really say we want to demonstrate the growth that they're showing. So, we really believe that SECO is a vital partner in this in terms of their expertise in dealing with that population of students. And as a policy group, we would love to have SECO working with both Shiloh and our assessment division. I know they were going to do some working, and they were asking for feedback from stakeholders. And we would really love to see if they can possibly come together maybe in April and give us an idea of what that could possibly look like for a modified college and career indicator, and what some next steps would be for that. So that was one of the things we talked about as an idea. Did I capture that part okay? And then the second piece that we talked about was a little bit about kind of our visit to the legislatures coming up at our next meeting. And we were looking at our strategic plan and our ledge platform that we've had, and reviewing it to see whether or not these continue to be our areas of focus and what we want to do about them. And I think one of the things we felt was missing in here or not spelled out enough is mental health. We talk about, social emotional supports, but it may be time that we start calling out mental health for making it a bigger priority. And then the other piece that we really talked about is, you struggle with being an advisory commission and being able to say, you want to give directives. You want to basically boss people. It's like my favorite thing in the world. But you want to, and we can't do that as a commission. But one of the things we talked about is maybe we need to go back and start using these different 5 pillar areas as we're setting our agenda, because we're missing some of these pieces, I think, in our continuing conversations at our meetings. So we have a tendency to kind of focus maybe on one of the pillars, and then we kind of get waylaid on the other. So it'd be helpful to kind of keep that in mind of kind of what we're doing with each pillar, and then really talking about how we can have some accountability, how we can get some data back or some information back. We're saying MTS is this great thing, and we say, oh, we want to make sure we have this coherent model, but how do we know how well that's working or where it is, and how can we be supportive of more districts doing that? So it's a good conversation, and I think there's some pieces in here we can definitely work with. So Michelle, Janine, anything else I'm missing on either of those?
No, very well done. So based on what both of the committees have brought back, you're scheduled to have legislative visits in April. And so the question for you would be, what do you want to bring back there? So strategically thinking, if you're going to go on Thursday and your meeting is going to be on Wednesday, you may want to put a considerable amount of time into making sure that whatever materials you're going to bring over and the talking points you're going to have, whether it be about the bills you decide to support or that you want people to know your platform and some key areas you want them to focus on, or something around the governor's trailer bill that you want to promote, that the Wednesday would be the only time you'd have to come together to make an agreement as a body to be able to do that. And whatever that is needs to be agendized so that the public can also give you input on whatever that would be that you're going to support overall. Otherwise, you can go as individuals and use these as tools and decide for yourself as individuals what you want, but you really can't go and say the advisory commission is formally supporting these. But there is some power when you do say that, because then they can put on the support positions actually up online that the advisory commission as a body voted to support certain things, or this is your platform you all voted on together and you stand as a body behind it as opposed to individual.
I will say, though, we always have the same conversation, just for on and on. I'm pleased that these discussions, in my mind, are in a lane that we're pretty comfortable being in. I don't see anything about inclusion or family empowerment, or I wasn't as involved in the policy conversation, but those are things we've talked about so much that I'm hopeful that on Wednesday, if we can build the agenda well, that we could get to a point where in the afternoon we could have very targeted and specific conversations. And if we end up changing one pillar of that, we have changed that document overnight and had it ready for Thursday morning to go. It's not that hard as long as we can find the template. But I think we're pretty close to maybe being able to have a really effective, as long as everybody understands, like, let's stay targeted on the Wednesday of the April meeting so that we can, focus our conversations to getting to a place where we are in agreement. And then if we have to make a document change overnight, we could do that, ready to hand out, I think.
I think, Summer, I don't necessarily think we need to change the pillars. I think that, one of the things we also talked about is you don't change your priorities every year. They're usually a multi-year thing. But maybe what we would want to do is just highlight either as, which one of these do we want to speak to? And obviously, if we're going to do support a bill on family empowerment, we want to show them that it also dovetails into our platform of supporting family engagement. So that's, I don't think right now, I didn't think we were advocating for changing these, but it's kind of for our work moving forward, let's look at, making sure we're kind of accounting for all of these pillars. But when we go over to the legislature, I think these are fine. But what we may want to do as a group on that Wednesday is say which of these dovetails into the legislation we want to support, so they they're not just randomly supporting family empowerment, they're supporting family empowerment because it falls under their pillar of family and community engagement. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think I know when I did the Ledge Action Day at ACSE for so many years, each group was always, we had some talking points, and sometimes your conversations deviated from those talking points, but we had collectively understood that we were all moving forth to talk about these current things. So maybe on that Wednesday we could craft in the time to develop that. And I think everyone would feel good about going on Thursday, having a common language that we were all speaking, which would be great. Any other comments from commissioners on that work? No? All right, we're a little ahead of time. Let's get to our last item of the day, item 10 for general public comment. Aaron, do we have anything today?
I don't have any general public comment cards at this time.
Well, that being said, I'm checking in with Gina and Kristen, my two previous chairs. Do we end early if we've shaved off some time? I think we had a hard day today. All right, well, I will take my last opportunity. Is Barbara still in the room, or did she run to the airport? All right, well, for posterity's sake, we will close the meeting with a shout out to Barbara and Matt. Thank you all for working hard today and tackling some big issues and listening carefully. I really appreciate it. And I will see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Have a good afternoon, everyone.